In our view, it looked neither agricultural nor residential, but more like an office building on a business park. It had a modern design with modern materials and looked completely out of place. It could never have blended in with its very attractive rural setting. When we saw the second proposal, we were very relieved and saw it as a huge improvement on the first. The two houses would be far less obtrusive. Materials and traditional design would help them to blend in with their surroundings. In addition, a very sympathetic landscaping plan would preserve the three, actually, ash trees on the western boundary. In the first proposal, these would have had to be felled, and create a much more attractive entrance and roadside boundary without the overgrown and very out of place leylandii. The view of the site from the road, as I think you saw in those two photographs from the west, would be much more appealing than the office building. As I already mentioned, we are the nearest neighbors. Our main sitting room, the terrace outside, our garden look directly onto the site, and we see it all day, every day, as do those of our neighbors. We are therefore very keen to try to ensure that this landscape is preserved and nothing is done to spoil it. We fully accept that developments do take place, but we would hope that these would be carried out in a sympathetic fashion with appropriate materials so that they blend in with their surroundings and, as far as possible, respect the wishes and opinions of those most closely affected. We believe that the second proposal does fulfill these requirements and that, far from having a detrimental impact on the area, as the recommendation to refuse, in my view, surprisingly suggests, would have a beneficial impact. I just was going to say here, the developer did produce mock-up photographs, and I hope the committee has seen them. The committee has seen them. We very much hope that the committee will be able to overturn the recommendation to refuse and approve the second proposal. Our neighbors, the Proudmans, are not able to be here this evening, but have asked to be associated with these comments. They fully support the second proposal, as do the Cooks, who live at the wharf just to the east of us and whose land actually surrounds the barn. I do very much appreciate the opportunity to express the opinion of those who may not be familiar with the technicalities of the planning process, but who will have to look at and live with the end result. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lees. Members, questions, if you have any. You seem to have satisfied the members without further need for questioning, Mr. Lees. Thank you very much indeed. And I now have Mr. Richard Evans, the applicant. If you come forward, Mr. Evans, thank you. If you could switch your microphone on, thank you.
This one?
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and councillors. My name is Richard Evans. My company is the applicant. I would also like to include my planning consultant if any questions come up of a more technical nature at the end of this talk. The principal issue here is one of betterment. This application is centered on a steel frame barn that, as a local developer, we've acquired and otherwise will convert under the extant Class Q consent. But we have an opportunity here to change that and build out an improved design, delivering a better outcome for the environment and for those that are most impacted, the local residents and future occupiers of these two homes. The CGIs, as you've seen, I think demonstrate in a far better way than I can in words, the improvement and benefit to the environment is very plain to see from those. That we're able to use the space available to replicate a rural farmyard layout in a typical Rutland style, using traditional materials, as Mr. Lees has already said, and we can retain some of the trees to improve screening on the western side of the site. The default alternative is a much more exposed modern shed covered in steel and cladding. I will leave you to decide which of these two schemes will have a, quote, detrimental impact on the surrounding area. But this is not groundbreaking. This very committee has already supported two similar applications in the past 13 months. These were at Caldecott and Thistleton. We respectfully ask for your consistency in determining our application in line with these. Let's take a look at some of the issues raised in the planning report. Floor space. Our scheme is marginally less than the Class Q when excluding the carports, which as open-sided structures should not be included. Both Caldecott and Thistleton were greater than their Class Q equivalent consents. Building heights. Our ridge heights are 0.75 of a metre higher than the barn, but both Caldecott and Thistleton were also higher to a greater height delta than their Class Q counterparts. In fact, our eaves height is only 0.1 of a metre higher compared with Caldecott scheme, which was at 0.9 of a metre higher. The building being outside of the barn footprint is not a particularly significant matter in planning terms, but nevertheless, the Thistleton scheme was approved despite this factor as well. Local support. We have a clean sweep of support and 0 objections. The parish council who recently changed their support from a neutral to a positive, and every single neighbour, there's only 3 of them, every single neighbour has supported this scheme, which is possibly unheard of with no objections, but then no one wants to live next to an overbearing shed. In contrast, the other schemes had objections from either the parish council or neighbours and no support. Domestication of the site. This is clearly going to happen in any event with Class Q as the default position. Scale of development. We have reduced the number of dwellings from 3 to 2. The other schemes had the same number of units. I should add that we, some of the dimensions referenced, in our view, were incorrect. We have sent a communication to the planning office to notify them of that. I believe one of the dimensions on heights was still incorrect that Mr. Mill just shown. And we have notified these discrepancies. The heights that I've just given you are 100% accurate. Of course, it's a better outcome for us as a developer as well. We principally believe that this scheme will leave a better legacy development that's going to stand the test of time and will blend into the stunning rural surroundings in a way that could never be achieved by a converted barn that looks like an industrial unit that belongs on the Oakham Industrial Estate. We design and develop beautiful homes that are sympathetic to the character, and they make us proud. And in many years from now, I'd hazard a guess that you, as well as neighbours, and indeed the council, will not regret supporting this application. In summary, the principle of development has been accepted by the council and endorsed in the officer's statement, albeit there's a conflicting comment about being outside of the planned limits of development. I know that you don't like Class Q. Particularly, we can debate its merits in unsustainable locations and whether modern barns are suitable for development, but this is current planning policy, and development in one form or another will happen. So we may as well make the best of it. That leads us back to the key issue.
In summary, Mr. Leeds, so I've been generous.
One sentence. Sorry, you have been very generous, Mr. Chair, and that's appreciated. One last sentence to close, if I may. That leads us back to the key issue. I hope you're persuaded that this is a better planning and environmental outcome. We ask you to take a pragmatic approach in deciding and to be consistent with the other approved schemes and support this application. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Members, questions? Councillor Payne.
Thank you, Chair. Could you tell me why you didn't propose to build the Class Q conversion out of the materials proposed for this application, so it looked in keeping with its surroundings and not like an industrial development?
Why? Can I have my planning consultant coming along too?
Why, you did indicate that before,
Thank
so if your agent, yeah.
Would you repeat the question, Councillor Payne?
The Class Q development.
Yes.
Why did you not propose to build it out of the materials that you're now proposing to use for this new development? So that the original Class Q
Yeah.
conversion didn't look like an industrial development.
Correct.
Can I answer that, Chair?
And yes, if you'll have to do a Laurel and Hardy, I'm
That's
afraid.
okay.
Yes.
All right, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to address the question. So under the Class Q provisions as permitted development, one of the key requirements is that the building must be capable of reuse as it stands. And the government guidance makes it clear that new structural work it is not acceptable. So that's been established through case law. The issue we would have had with trying to build or convert or change the use of the building out of traditional materials in terms of stone and brick and a slate roof, that existing structure would not have been capable of taking that level of load, and it would have inevitably resulted in new structural work, which would have not fitted with the permitted development rules.
Okay, thank you.
Supplementary on that?
No, that's fine,
Payne?
thanks. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Is there a reason why you've dropped from 3 to 2 dwellings?
Take that, Roy.
No, you go ahead.
Right, let me take that. Am I still on? Yes. We felt, Councillor McCartney, that 2 dwellings was an optimal use of that size of land. To have 3 in there, we could have kept, but it would have been squeezing it in. And we particularly wanted to retain a sympathetic rural Rutland style barnstead type of development. That was not possible. And we did try with 3. It was not possible with 3 dwellings. Would have been too crammed in and not allowed for that type of design to happen. And we felt that was the critical issue, was to get a design that was sympathetic to a typical Rutland barnyard, and also leaving some amenity to the residents of those dwellings once built.
Thank you. Any other members? Any other questions? Thank you very much indeed to both of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
In that case, we can now move into the debate. And again, I will ask Councillor McCartney if she would. Sorry? Oh, thank you.
Thanks, Chairman. Morcott Overton Parish Council discussed this last week. They are very much in favour of this new proposed development, precisely for all the reasons that have been given. It does look much, much better. They voted, I think I'm allowed to say, 5 in favour, 1 against and 1 abstention. So there was some actually considerable debate on the night, which lasted quite a long time and got rather excited. The councillor voting against didn't give a reason why. I couldn't, in all conscience, come here and tell the committee that there is anybody in the ward that would really be against this new proposal, although I do fully take on board the reasons given in the report by the officers, which leaves me in a real quandary. I'm very much looking forward to a full debate on this issue, because we have got a very difficult case in front of us. But yeah, speaking as ward member, the ward is very much in favour of this, and it would be a much improved view for everybody looking out upon it, particularly the neighbours, who I think are affected by this. You know, they can see it every day. I run past that site. I live in Barrow. I do the loop round 4 or 5 times a week. I run straight past that. It is an eyesore. It would look a lot better. I'm a little bit confused by the proposed access. So I think when we come on to, I'd like to talk to the officers about the new proposed access and what's going to happen there, because if we could go to slide, Paul, slide 18 and 19 of yours. Yeah, so that's the existing access, I think, isn't it? Or is the existing access?
Existing access is there.
Okay.
And that's the proposed access.
Yeah. Yeah, so if we go down to slide 18 and 19. Yeah, I just thought that looked rather misleading because that's actually a field entrance to the field. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, for the benefit of the committee, that is a field entrance and not the entrance to the site.
That emphasises the access better, the hard landscape.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, yeah. Well, there we go. Yeah, the ward is very much in favour of it. Councillor Harvey made the same statement. I'm concerned about moving from 3 dwellings down to 2. I know several families in Market Overton that, you know, that have family members that would like to stay in the area that perhaps can't. And I think what we're looking at here is 2 reasonably expensive houses in place of 3, should we say, much less expensive houses. So from that point of view, I think it is a shame that there were some very strong arguments in favour of this at the parish council last week, and I promised them that I would represent them here. That's all I've got to say at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've got Councillor Oxley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, whilst I can understand why the people living in the locale would prefer to have this development rather than the default alternative, the issue is a planning one, and every single planning application that we look at has to be looked at on its own merits. So what we are being asked to agree this evening are 2 houses in open countryside, which actually ignore the planned limits of development of the village. They also ignore the Class Q permission, which has already been given. And they also ignore the footprint of the Class Q permission that has already been given. So we are being asked to approve 2 dwellings which are going to sit on a field outside of Market Overton, which will completely ignore the fact that the Class Q permission would not have such an overdevelopment in that field. So when I saw this, when I first saw this, I thought to myself, the Class Q permission, which we have had many struggles with on this committee, with people asking for permissions to build on industrial, ex-industrial buildings. Default route is to put into the building itself is replaced by a residential dwelling, which is what the government has said that we are allowed to do. That is not what we're being asked to do this evening. What we're being asked to do this evening is to pull down the existing structure and to build 2 new dwellings on the site around the existing structure, which is not what Class Q is all about as far as I'm concerned. I'll be very, whilst as I say, I can totally sympathise that it would be much nicer to have 2 dwellings like this on the site. I don't believe that we would actually be able to do that because it goes against all of our policies. And also, I believe, goes against national policy as well. I mean, Justin will probably be able to, the development manager will be able to advise on Class Q, but and I also think this would perhaps set quite a dangerous precedent because there are many barns around the county which are crying out to be converted into residential properties similar to what we are asked to give permission to this evening. But that is not what Class Q is about. Class Q is turning redundant industrial agricultural buildings into a dwelling. So I'm hard pushed to find any reason why we should refuse to go with the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Oxley. I'll bring Mr. Johnson in. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Obviously, we've had lots of debates at various meetings about Class Q and the how good or not the policy is in relation to that. In terms of the fallback position, and there's other applications that have been mentioned tonight. I mean, what we have always looked to do as a planning department is that we have to determine the application in accordance with the development plan. So the start is that these are isolated dwellings in the countryside where the policy wouldn't support new build. However, we also need to take on board the fact that there is a Class Q there. And what we have tried to do on other cases is look to get schemes where there is a betterment to it. So there have been schemes that have been allowed where the Caldecott one, there was a large agricultural building. The footprint was reduced overall. That took into account an overhang that was still part of the building. So overall, the built form would have been reduction. It's also important to note that that Class Q was allowed on appeal as well. And then there was, sorry, where was he? Yeah, there was an application in Thistleton as well that we brought to committee. And members may recall there were two barns that were on the edge of the conservation area and adjacent to listed buildings. And we allowed a similar proposal to what is here today, which was to demolish those buildings and replace them with a new build. That it would have a much better effect in terms of the conservation area, the listed buildings, but it was of a reduced footprint. It was the same, no more than the Class Q. Now, the applicant mentioned that in his opinion, the carport shouldn't be included in any measurements. I'm not sure why they've come to that conclusion, but as far as I'm concerned, they should be taken into account. And as part of determining the application, Case Officer Paul did go back to the applicants and suggest that we might be willing to accept some new build as a replacement, which would clearly be better than the building that's there, but it would need to be on a reduced footprint. So if the buildings were reduced slightly from what we see here, then as officers, we may well have supported it, but they declined to submit amended plans. And, you know, as far as we were concerned, that this, you know, goes too far and that we shouldn't be accepting it. And as we've already said, whilst each case is looked at on its own merits, we've already seen by the applicant tonight bringing forward what previous decisions we've made and making representations to members about that. So I'm sure that if this was approved, we would have other applicants potentially, you know, using this and arguing why other schemes of a similar size should potentially be approved. Now, my personal opinion and recommendation is that the application as per the report is refused, and that if the applicant wants to come back and negotiate a slightly reduced scheme that's in line with the discussions that we've already had, then that might be a more acceptable and appropriate way forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. I've listened carefully to what Mark and Justin have said, and I'm of a similar mind about Preston. As a lot of you know, that I've been fighting Class Q for many, many years. My opinion is the Class Q development that was approved actually goes against the spirit of what it was originally intended for, which has left us in a very difficult position with something which is completely out of keeping with the rural setting against something which probably would fit there, because particularly if you refer to point 2 in the refusal, it would result in an undesirable change. Well, I don't see this as an undesirable change. I think this is actually a very desirable change from the original. But we have to understand what precedent means and what that could mean for the rest of the county. But that does bring me to a couple of points of clarification, either from our legal representative or from Justin. The first is about carports. And should they or should not be included. My interpretation, I may be completely wrong. As far as I'm concerned, the carports are not taken in consideration when SIL is calculated. Is that right? SIL.
No, I don't think that.
So therefore, why is there an argument that carports should not be concluded since they don't actually have any SIL attached to them? And my second point of clarification, again, I completely agree with Mark about building in the open countryside, because this was normal application for getting the class Q, we probably wouldn't look at it. But what is the implications on that part of the policy as far as our 5-year land supply is concerned? And with the fact that we don't have a 5-year land supply by quite a long way, if that application was to come up in its raw form, would we actually be minded to approve it because of the land supply? And would that be an argument at appeal? Those are my 2 points of clarification I would like. Thank you.
Sorry, Chairman, I'm just trying to sort out how issue with it.
I generally have this effect on technology, but on this occasion, I'm not to blame. We'll just pause while the officer get that sorted. So, Mr. Johnson, could you, it always pays to be well connected. Would you like to answer the question from Councillor Beggy? That last.
In terms of the floor area, in terms of the calculation, there's not a lot of guidance on there, but in terms of if you look at the planning fees guidance in terms of what's included in terms of a planning application for a building and what isn't. Floor area would include all that area that's part of the footprint of the building that's covered. So the carports would be included. There's nothing that says that they shouldn't be included as part of an application.
I suppose the contradiction there is that SIL won't include it. It's not seen as part of the footprint.
But that's yeah. Sorry, go.
No, sorry.
Sorry, I'm bringing the legal officer in.
I think the point. I get the points on SIL, and obviously when they're working out values, paying sort of monetary contributions. But I think what Justin's making the very good point is that the design guides, and when you're looking at build form, it's obviously the mass, isn't it? When you're looking at the plan application. And I agree that just having a quick look here, that in our design code, that it clearly looks that I don't see why carports don't form part of that footprint when you're looking at the overall development. But I take your point on SIL, but I think it's slightly a completely different matter why that SIL wouldn't be part of it, because it's to do with values, isn't it? Overall values on a piece of land.
I was going to say, I think also the way the SIL legislation was written was arguably there to benefit applicants in so much as they're not paying SIL on areas that are not primary habitable accommodation. I mean, it's not something. The SIL regulations are quite detailed, and it's not something that I can go into specifics.
No, I get that.
Need to look into that.
You say that's how it may have been written.
Yeah.
But class Q may have been written for another purpose, which actually has turned out. But I'm just trying to get my head around how potentially we can have a better solution than what is already put forward without setting a precedent. That's my question. Okay, my second question was about the 5-year land supply and the impact that would have on this development for being built in open countryside.
So in terms of the 5-year housing land supply, obviously we don't have one at the moment. The class Q was for 3 dwellings. The current proposal is for 2. I think in the overall assessment, the loss of 1 or the addition of 3, we're talking very small numbers. So I don't think that has a significant impact or should be given that much weight in members' assessments of the application. Obviously, it needs to be weighed in the balance, but like I say, we're talking about the difference of one dwelling between the two schemes.
I think my question more, Justin, was that going to Mark's point about being basically two brand new developments in open countryside, forgetting to some degree that it's replacing a class Q. If they came forward as buildings in open countryside without the class Q, would they potentially be minded to approve because of the lack of a 5-year landing supply?
There would still be arguments about sustainability and things like that that would need to be taken into consideration. And so I think we would still be recommending refusal on those grounds. I think where the 5-year housing land supply argument has far greater impact is those sites on the edge of villages where there are no other material objections, but the impact in terms of landscape and things like that, like I say, if this had come in without a class Q, it would be recommended for refusal on various grounds in terms of impact on the open countryside and sustainability. The fact is that we have to take into account the fallback position of the class Q.
Councillor Cross, and I've got Councillor Gordon Brown after that. Your microphone, please, Councillor Cross.
Would you like to take the floor first? Are you sure?
Each before duty.
Thank you, Gordon. A hypothetical question for our planning officer. If the houses and the application have been submitted without the carports, would that have been acceptable?
In our discussions with the agents during the course of the application, we did discuss simple design principles that we may deem to be more acceptable in this location. That was more linear type buildings with smaller projections. So
may I just stop you there? Now, the question was, would the houses without the carports have been acceptable? And I think really the answer then is either yes or no.
probably not, no.
Thank you very much indeed. However, if you had answered yes, I would have said or suggested that the applicant could have built the houses and then added the carports at a later date. Would that be a correct assumption?
No, because if we was to recommend approval for this application, we would likely remove PD rights, which would mean that they wouldn't be able to build the carports without coming to us with a formal application.
Thank you very much indeed for that clarification. If I may just go on, having been completely defeated. Each application that we discuss has to be decided upon its own merits. And I know that previous applications of this type have come up and have been changed. I do not believe that whatever decision we take will actually affect other outcomes, because we as a planning committee should not really be impacted by other applications and such decisions. It's been said that this is in a greenfield site. It is not. It's in an old farm yard. And I believe that the applicants have put a lot of work into actually trying to create something that would improve that particular area. And at this time, I am very minded to propose that we accept the applicant, his application as it is. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Cross, Councillor Gordon Brown. Sorry.
I just wanted to just make a point on the point of precedent. You're absolutely right. We do have to take every individual application before us on its merits. But as you can see in the report, people will reference decisions of this committee or decisions of officers in similar scenarios. So that's where precedents can sort of, if you've done it somewhere else, then obviously that's where you're sort of setting your mark, because this is a planning judgment. This decision that you're making tonight is a planning judgment, and it's where the tilted balance is on design and, you know, massing of that. So that's what you're looking at, really. It's where you're putting the balance here. Is it a betterment, or is it over, you know, over?
Mr. Chairman, I welcome that clarification, but I still maintain that we, as a planning committee, should be brave enough and open-minded enough to look at any application and take it on its own merits. And this does have merit when we consider some of the applications that we have said okay to. And, you know, personally, I've found them to be abhorrent, but, you know, it is up to members. But thank you for that clarification.
Councillor Gordon Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Just a brief point, and that relates to the issue of the existing Class Q approval for 3 dwellings. Maybe just clarify for me the number of bedrooms in each of those houses or dwellings. They're always semi-detached or terraced effectively, because I'm looking at these 2 dwellings, and they're both basically 5-bedroomed houses, which, if I'm not mistaken, is not really in line with our needs as an authority. If you look at the strategic housing market assessment, our need is for 2, 3 and 4-bedroom houses, not for 5 and 6-bedroom houses. And I'm concerned about that. I can understand some of the concerns of fellow members in respect of the what's being proposed against what the Class Q approval was, but I think there is this issue of the needs of our community, and particularly the local needs, and I suspect that is not being met. But maybe if you just clarify on the previous application of the Class Q, how many bedrooms per dwelling there was on that one.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you. As you can see, these are the floor plans for the Class Q. On the ground floor, these are the bedrooms here, and they're quite small bedrooms. There's 3 bedrooms here. Bedroom 2 is in particular a really small bedroom, and then they had an upper floor which had just one singular bedroom to the upper floor. So there's one large bedroom to the upper floor and 3 reasonably small bedrooms, particularly, but bedroom 2 is a really small bedroom, as opposed to the 5 bedrooms that's large 5 bedrooms that's proposed on the proposed scheme.
So these would be turned 3, 4 as against 4, 5.
Correct.
Yeah, okay, that clarifies that point for me.
Thank you very much. Any other? Sorry, I've got Councillor Andrew Brown on site.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Clearly, this is an improvement on the existing shed Class Q, and just to correct Mr. Evans, the counterpart application, as Mr. Johnson said, was actually less than the Class Q fallback. But I mean, it is at the end of the day a converted shed if you look at the fallback position, and some of the modern designs of the 50s and 60s as they were then now look very dated and out of place, where I think this application in 40, 50 years time is still going to look in keeping with the Rutland landscape. And we've got the scenario now where we've got a lot of 1960s agricultural sheds which are basically at end of life. And I would rather be looking at 2 reasonable looking houses than a tumbled down shed covered in brambles, etc., or a Class Q, which is basically nothing other than a shed with some windows in it. So on this occasion, I'm minded to agree with Councillor Cross, which is quite unusual, but I will leave it there, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Ball.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The decision before us this evening as a committee is not an easy one, given this particular scenario. Such developments never are. And our officers have recommended refusal. And I have to say, I think our officers have looked at this very carefully, and I rate the professionalism of our officers. I think we have very good officers in this particular county, and we're very fortunate. However, I think on such developments, it's incumbent on us to take a measured and on balance decision. And equally so, it's also incumbent upon this committee to be consistent in its policy making and its decisions. And we have heard of similar applications before. I think when you're trying to be consistent, it can only be consistent in principle. You cannot get detailed down, this was X square meters, that one slightly more. It's got to be on the overall balance, in my opinion. On this particular site, there will be development. We know this from the Class Q. Now, very often with such developments, we know we have quite a lot of objections. Now, this evening, we have the opposite. We have, perhaps if I hear Councillor McCartney at the Parish Council, there was one objector who did not speak. But on this occasion, we have the Parish Council in support, and we have the near neighbours in support. And then I listened to the developer, who I think has made good strides into coming forward with an acceptable development for the future of 2 units. And I certainly agree with Councillor Brown that the 60s architecture, if I can loosely call it that, is certainly undesirable. So it is a difficult decision, but I think on balance, I have to say I will be voting in favour of the 2-unit build. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Again, I've had, I'll bring Councillor Oxley back and Councillor McCartney after that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What we mustn't lose sight of is the fact that this is a development in open countryside. Irrespective of what has been said this evening, we have a Class Q permission, which looks very ugly. And I agree that it is ugly. And perhaps the applicant should have made it prettier when it was first suggested that this building was converted to a residential dwelling. In fact, it may help the fact that we are being asked to look at a different proposal this evening, because the default alternative, which is the permission that has already been given to build on the site, is ugly. And that worries me a little bit. So we could actually, in the future, we could have developers making applications for dwellings which look like this. And then a year down the road, they say, actually, that's a very ugly building. Would it be okay if we don't build that and we build something which is a little bit prettier? And that may be what we're being faced with this evening. Call me cynical. But what we have this evening is a change to the existing permission, which it will allow the developer to build 2 dwellings instead of 3 on a slightly different footprint of the Class Q. If you take into consideration the carports, you mustn't forget the fact that we actually are constantly asked to convert fields into gardens, and they are refused because they are not in keeping with the agricultural element of the field. What we have this evening, as I've mentioned before, is a barn, a metal barn that has permission to be converted into 3 dwellings under the Class Q rules, which the government imposed on rural areas. And that permission was given, albeit, so it's not an attractive alternative to what we are being asked to make a decision on this evening. But that, as I say, that worries me. And I think, I may be wrong, but I would suggest that, as I've said before, there are many barns sitting quietly rusting away in corners of farmyards, which would benefit from changing into attractive dwellings like this. And that's what we are constantly being faced with. And I will finish speaking there. I cannot see how we can support this. And it will certainly, if we do support it, it will certainly be used in the future for exactly the same development all over the county. Thank you.
Councillor McCartney, before you start speaking, if it's new points, please, or I think we do need to move on. Thank you.
Thanks, Chairman. I've already outlined why as ward member I would be in favour of this, but I'd like to bring something else in, which is that the Victorians built terraces of workers' cottages, many of which are now looked at as being very attractive. The planning team have an open dialogue with the applicant and have suggested that this could possibly be brought back with an amended design. I would suggest that the neighbours who are very much in favour of this development may also be very much in favour of 3 or 4 smaller 2-3 bed cottages, which would look just as attractive as 2 5-bedroom houses. It's anything that is not a steel and glass and wood and clad structure, I think is the message that we have from the village, from the neighbours. I think the other aspect of class Qs and the structures. I mean, Councillor Brown said that we're looking at plenty of agricultural buildings built in the 60s, which are now coming to the end of their life. Well, they are getting class Q developments. Did they ought to be getting class Q developments if, structurally speaking, they are coming to the end of their life? It almost necessitates the fact that they have to come down. Personally, I own 4 or 5 similar buildings. It hasn't really crossed my mind to try to develop those because they've frankly had it, and I would have to start again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before I ask for a proposal, I haven't commented yet, so I will just add. I've said several times before that the planning process has 2 elements, the officers and the members, and we have different roles in trying to come to a proper conclusion. The officers quite rightly have to go by the legislation as written. If it was simply that, we would have no need of a planning committee to sit here and make judgment on trying to reflect quite often the views of local community, but exercising our judgment as to the merits or otherwise of a particular application. Class Q, my Vice Chairman, Councillor Beggy, has waxed eloquent on this on many occasions. It is an appalling piece of legislation. It's very badly drafted, and it, as you've seen tonight, it leads to all sorts of ambiguities and, in fact, downright contradictions. I'm therefore looking as well at policy, and I'm doing what I think, with respect, Councillor Oxley, you said you thought you understood it. I don't think I do, because as I see it, both applicants and officers tend to cherry pick, and I'm now going to do the same thing. And I would draw your attention to chapter 12 in the National Planning Policy, which actually says achieving well-designed places. You then follow it down in the hierarchy of planning, site allocations and policy, SP15, design and amenity. And you then follow it down into core strategy 19, promoting good design. Now, I quite agree with what other members have said. This is not a straightforward decision, but, and I will wait for a proposal in a moment, but my feeling as an individual is that I would go for what has been achieved over the design. And I take Councillor Payne's point when she asked the agent, why could you not build this in the original place? And we got an answer, which I'm not a structural engineer. We got a perfectly good answer on that. But I'm looking, please, for a proposal now, whether to go in line with the officer's recommendation for refusal or whether you wish to approve it. May I look for a proposal, please? Councillor Gordon-Brown.
Propose the officer's recommendation, Chair.
Officer's recommendation, and Councillor Oxley is seconding that. Those in favour of the recommendation as it is in the paper, which is for refusal, please.
For, Chair.
And those against?
For, Chair.
You have now put me in a very difficult position. It is normally convention, members of the public, that the chairman would go with the officer's report. Sorry, I think that is the convention. On the other hand, I would feel uneasy having voted and spoken in the way that I do, that I just have done. So I am in fact going to give the casting vote in favour of approval. And I realise, and that is no reflection on the officers on my left, it is simply, that is the conclusion I've come to. Thank you.
Chairman, in terms of a recommendation then for approval, and if members are minded to vote for approval, can I just suggest some conditions that be attached to any decision?
Yes, please do, Mr. Johnson. Yes,
if I can, I think we would need to attach conditions that cover the following areas. Highways, so details about the access and parking, landscaping details to be submitted, materials samples to be provided, drainage details, and then removing permitted development rights for further extensions or outbuildings.
Highways, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Could you also ask for details of removal of the redundant access, please? Yes. Thank you.
So if I can just clarify that motion was lost, so we've obviously got to have another motion now.
Yes.
Of approval.
I was just about doing for that. Yes. So, well, I'll in fact propose from the chair acceptance. Do I have a seconder, please? I saw Councillor Bull fractionally earlier than Councillor Cross, and all those in favour of that recommendation, then please. With the conditions, sorry. Yes.
For, Chair.
For and against?
3, Chair.
And abstentions?
2, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. So that is duly approved. I would just like to add a guidance note to the applicant on the landscaping. I was speaking to the Lord Lieutenant earlier today, and she is particularly keen to achieve tree planting over the next year. And if your landscaping could include planting of new trees, and if you could inform the Lord Lieutenant's office, she is keeping close check on the number of trees, and I know that her aim is that she would get 40,000 trees planted in the course of the next year, which is 1 per head of population in Rutland, very roughly. Councillor Bull.
May I just clarify that, Mr. Chairman? The Lord Lieutenant is actually following our Queen, who complete 70 years, and it's the green canopy. So the Queen is sponsoring the green canopy throughout the country, and obviously our Lord Lieutenant is doing her very best. And the reason for 40,000, it's the rounded figure of the number of residents, of people we have in this county. Thank you for your indulgence.
Thank you. And our next item is going to move on to the planning and onto the Gambling Act and our colleagues from Peterborough. So if you came from the Market Overton one and would like to leave, please do now. Right, thank you very much, members. And if I could welcome Mr. Gareth Brighton, Ms. Terry Martin, who will talk us through. And I think, again, members, you will see the main things have alterations have been highlighted in red in your papers. But I'll hand over to our colleagues from Peterborough. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, councillors. Tonight, members of the Planning and Licensing Committee are here to consider the revised proposed Gambling Act 2005 Statement of Principles as attached to Appendix D to the report. Councils are required to review and republish a revised Statement of Principles every 3 years, and that's where we are. So a little bit of background. The Gambling Act 2005 received royal assent on the 7th of April 2005. While some of the provisions of the 2005 Act came into force during 2005 and 2006, the majority of the legislation came into effect on the 1st of September 2007. The 2005 Act reformed the law on gambling in Great Britain. It introduced a new regulator, that's the Gambling Commission, and gave power to licensing authorities to grant premises licenses and permits. The 2005 Act places a legal duty on both the Commission and licensing authorities to aim to permit gambling, insofar as it is considered to be reasonably consistent with the pursuit of the licensing objectives. The effect of this duty is that both the Commission and licensing authorities must approach their functions in a way that seeks to regulate gambling using their powers. For example, powers to attach conditions to licenses, to moderate its impact on the licensing objectives, rather than by starting out to prevent gambling altogether. The Gambling Commission are responsible for issuing operators licenses and personal licenses, which need to be held prior to applying for a premises license. The Commission attach conditions to licenses they issue and impose a code of practice commonly known as the LCCP. They are responsible for regulating online gambling and issue and periodically update guidance to licensing authorities. The latest guidance revision was in April 2021. The proposed policy before members this evening was updated in line with the latest guidance prior to undergoing a consultation, which ran from the 27th of August to the 15th of October 2021. Consultation document is available at Appendix B, was emailed to those identified in Appendix A, and was also made available in the library, the museum, and the council's website. The members will note in 3.6 of the report that there were 2 responses to the consultation and 1 inquiry. The responses were fully considered and the proposed policy has been updated in consideration of those responses. Namely, the HMRC postal contact details have been updated and at paragraph 18.7 has been modified to remove some outdated text. In summary, the proposed statement of principles contains minimal amendments, and any amendments made are in line with the current guidance issued by the Gambling Commission. It is very much maintaining a grip on the tiller rather than a change of course. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Are there any Councillor Cross? Yes.
I think an enormous amount of work has been put in by our 2 staff members on this report, and they've been following the national guidelines. And I think it is right and proper that we should support their endeavours. And I fully endorse the work that they have done. And I believe this committee should accept it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Is that a formal proposal?
Well, it
Councillor Cross.
jolly well is, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, having read through the report, I concur with what Councillor Cross has said, and the changes are very slight as far as I can make out, simply just to bring it up to date with the latest legislation. So if that is a formal recommendation, I'll be happy to second it.
More seconding, unless there are any other questions, members. We've got two recommendations. Approve the proposal, which I've already had a proposer and seconder, and I hope that the proposer and seconder would be prepared to take the second item, which is that they recommend to the council on the 13th of December the formal adoption of that. You're happy with that? In that case, if I could take the vote, please.
Unanimous, Chair.
Unanimous. And thank you very much indeed to Peterborough colleagues for all the hard work and for your attendance tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Now moving on to the next item on the planning applications, and this is the Pingle Lane Morcott one, and Mr. Hodges is about to present. Thank you, Mr. Hodges.
Thank you, Chairman. This is an application for the erection of a dwelling on the edge of the village of Morcott. This is the site that you can see where the red mark is, marking the site on the northern edge of the village. This is a closer view into that piece of land. The land is accessed. The land is accessed off Pingle Lane at the point where the arrow is, down an access track into the wider part of the site. Pingle Lane carries on beyond the site and then becomes a public right of way, which you can see in yellow here, disappearing off to the top of the field where it joins another path, which you'll see on another separate plan. Right, so this is the outline of the actual site itself and the proposal. So the access comes in from the end of Pingle Lane down here at the bottom. It passes adjacent to an existing bungalow at that point there. And then, as members saw on site last week, when you're actually standing on this top end of the site here, you would actually be level with this roof, the green roof of the proposed dwelling in this location. And then at the rear of it, on the to get a south-facing aspect, is a sunken courtyard, which is in that location. And then in front of the dwelling, there's an extended element where there would be an annex at the end of the promenade there, which would oversit this wetland area. And the site generally slopes down towards the bottom, where you can see there's a watercourse runs along the northern edge of the site. So this is a view as you come down Church Lane. It's a sort of the church is situated on an island in the middle of Church Lane, so you can come down one side and go back up the other, or vice versa. So that's with your back to the bottom of Church Lane and Pingle Lane. And then this is looking down where the road becomes Pingle Lane further down. And then this is where the access to the site is, where that vehicle there, that is the access track down into the site. And you can see over to the left where Pingle Lane carries on and eventually peters out and becomes the footpath over the field. But this is from the actual gate into the site, looking back up the access road. So that car there is in the same position as the one on the previous photograph. And on the right-hand side, behind that conifer hedge, is the existing bungalow, which is That's just part of the side of the bungalow, and this is adjacent to the actual gate into the site itself at the bottom of that access drive. So this is looking into the site from the gate. The dwelling would be situated over in this area. And then that's looking more immediately to the right as you come in the gate across the top end of the site. And that's looking back towards the gate where that adjacent bungalow is, you can see there. And then this is where the site opens out, and you can see that it's generally sort of flat towards this top end near the access, and it does fall away down towards the north and the northwest. And then that's a view further to the left, looking at the trees down the left-hand side of the boundary. And that's a similar view. So when we were on site, members saw that there's a hedge along the top of that field there, beyond which the other part of the footpath runs. And when you're on that footpath, you can't actually see this site because of the hedge. So just to point out, there's a proposed construction access which comes off Glebe Road at the top near to those farm buildings you can just see in the distance. And it will come down the side of this green field, which is where the footpath actually runs at an angle up that field to the top corner before it goes out onto the road one way and behind the other hedge the other way. And there will be a compound at the bottom where there would be an access across that small stream or ditch to get access in to save vehicles, particularly construction vehicles, travelling down Church Lane, which was a problem that was identified by many locals at the time the application first came in, when the construction access was proposed to be down Church Lane. So the construction access is now proposed from Glebe Road to minimise the impact on Church Lane itself. But this is showing the line of the footpath. So here's the application site here. The construction access would follow this. There's an existing track that comes down from the road, and then it would come down the side of this hedge to a compound at the bottom, approximately that location, and it would be the footpath would be fenced off so that the footpath users and the construction vehicles would be separate, kept separate. So this is the plan of the village, which shows the extent of the conservation area, which is the purple line, which you'll see wraps around the top northeastern side of the site. And the planned limit to development shown in the black line, just in that part of the village. So you can see that the planned limit to development does actually follow those two parts of the boundary of the application site. And this is a wider view now, putting the proposal in context. So this is the house here, with the annex at the end of the promenade, with the wetland area at the bottom. And again, that's just reiterating that slide that you saw earlier. This is the floor plan. It's all on one level. The annex at the end of the promontory here is at a slightly lower level, and you would walk out along this terrace, and there was then a sunken set of steps that would take you down into that little one-bed annex at the end of the promenade there. And in here, there's a master bedroom here, and 3 other bedrooms here. So there's 4 bedrooms altogether, and then the main living space is through this area with a cinema room there. And above this area, this storage area here, would be the garage that would be accessed from the level above near the gate. So this blue line indicates the construction access. So the idea is to come in off the A47. It would just touch into the village, turn right onto the high street and down Willoughby Road, which then becomes Glebe Road, to get that access in at the top. And that's just showing the detail of where the construction access would be off Glebe Road. It's intended to widen that access out to allow the vehicles to get in and out of there easier and safer. And then you'll see there's a recommended condition to ensure that all that land is reinstated when construction is finished. Oh, just going back to that, there's a section at the bottom there that shows you how the track would be constructed. So it's just a 200 mil compacted gravel base, basically with a post and wire fence on the left there to mark the footpath. And that area at the top, the pink area, is the area that's shown as the compound for the construction. This is the sort of landscape strategy, which shows the arrival area down here where the garage would be. You've got the steps down into the courtyard, which is the main point of arrival. There's a kitchen garden associated quite closely at the side of the dwelling. And then beyond that, it remains, the land would remain landscaped and managed in a more of a natural fashion, with some meadow land. And then you've got the wetland here, which collects, as you saw, the land drops would collect the surface water. And then you've got the stream that runs beyond that at the end, on the northern end. These are sections through the site. I'm sorry, they're a little bit small, but they're the two sections shown on these two red axes on the plan. The top one is the section through here, looking back in this direction. So you can see you've got the arrival area up here, and then which that demonstrates again that the roof of the building would be sort of approximately level with the land level as it is as you enter the site. And then the building would be effectively stepped into the hillside. And as you can see from the section below, which is the other section BB along this line, that shows you there's the annex at the bottom, and there's the main dwelling, and then you can just see the garage at a slightly higher level in the background next to the entrance. And this is the main landscape master plan, which reiterates what we've just said, in that there's the green roof to the house, which is level with the entry point here. You would then come down the steps into the courtyard to the main entrance. There would be a kitchen garden here closely associated with the dwelling, and then the rest of the land would be managed as sort of wild meadow, with a suggestion of sort of mown paths going through it to avoid that sort of domestic appearance that you might otherwise get. And this is a sort of a three-dimensional view of the building. Again, the access is here with the garage, steps down into this south-facing courtyard, green roof level with the entry, then the building steps down. And then this is a similar view from the southern side, which the steps down into the courtyard would be here. So you've got this south-facing courtyard, which is for sort of open, more of the domestic open part of the site, and the annex down there, and the garage here in the foreground. And that's the west elevation, again, which shows the height of the garage there on the right. And then this is there's a set of sort of traditional black railings along the walkout to above the annex. This is the elevation as you would come into the site from the south. So you'll see the garage primarily from that view. You can see the dwelling is not really visible from there, apart from this element, which is intended to be a chimney, which would be a working chimney if required, but it's also constructed to ensure that there's a habitat in there, some habitat creation for bats and various species of birds. This is the elevation from the east. So again, you've got the garage at high level. The flat green roof here is hidden behind a parapet, so there's no railings along that elevation. And you've got recessed fenestration here on the north facing side, and then the annex down here at the lower level. And again, that's the elevation from the north. So here's the house tipping down the hill, and the annex again out on the right. And that's the sort of CGI image of what the building would look like from the northwest corner of the site, looking back up towards where the garage is at the top there, where the entrance gate is that you saw earlier. So you can see that the site is largely contained by trees. This is an example from Stamford Stone where the material would be sourced. So there's ashlar and random coarse limestone, which is going to be dry laid so that it does reveal these recesses, which also adds to the biodiversity count on the building, because that will allow flora and fauna to establish within the building itself. Now, we saw the footpath earlier. This is the plan here that showed that footpath. So the construction access would run down the side of the hedge here. And this is a photograph or an image generated from that position at the top of the field, where you would look down, and that's about the only view that you'd get of the property, because from the footpath over to the left, it's behind the hedge, and from Glebe Road itself, there's a hedge all the way down, so there would be very rare glimpses of the property from Glebe Road, and if you were actually driving, you probably wouldn't see it at all. Just to put it into context, you can see the church spire there, but that's one of the issues that we'll come on to on the heritage side in just a moment. Just to go back a step, there was a preliminary inquiry submitted for this site, which went to the first design review. And this was the image that was proposed at the outset, which neither the design review panel nor us as officers thought was particularly appropriate. So the developer went away and redesigned the scheme to the one that you now see, which did get a much better reception from the design review panel. Though they did have some concerns about the appearance of the building and the whole sort of concept behind it, but they weren't things that we thought was necessarily unacceptable. They were just perhaps a bit more of a purist query from the design panel as to what the concept was meant to be. I don't think they quite understood it, but I think looking at it in terms of the actual design now, then that's acceptable. This was an appeal site that was referred to in the report, whereby an appeal for a paragraph 80 house, which you'll get from the report, this actually is for, and we'll come on to that in a minute. This is one where an inspector allowed an appeal for a dwelling here in this red land, and you'll see it's sort of fairly close to the edge of this village. There are dwellings in this location here, and the inspector in that case felt that was isolated. But when you read the report in terms of the case law, you'll see that isolated means one of two things. That's just an aerial photograph of that same site, but I'll come to that in a minute. So these are the main issues that you need to consider. We've got paragraph 11D of the MPPF, which is the paragraph that says where you don't have a 5-year housing land supply, you should give priority to granting planning permission for new housing. We've got paragraph 80, which is the exceptional design clause, which this application primarily was submitted under. Paragraph 134 of the MPPF also talks about exceptional design. And then we've got the core strategy policies and the site allocation policies, which we'll come on to. And then we've got issues about the impact on the conservation area, on listed buildings, on the character of the edge of the village, the construction access, ecology and archaeology. So just to follow these through, paragraph 11D, which you'll be familiar with from the previous application and from the report. It does say for decision taking for sustainable development, this means that where there are no relevant development plan policies, or the policies which are most important for determining the application are out of date, and the asterisk goes to a footnote in the MPPF there, which is reproduced at the bottom. And this includes, for application involving the provision of housing, situations where the local planning authority cannot demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, which is the situation, as you know, we are in at the moment. So that should be granted planning permission unless the other policies of the framework are so clearly contravened by the rest of the development that it should still be refused. So paragraph 80 was introduced in the 1990s in the old PPG 7 by John Gummer, who was the minister at the time, to try and keep up the tradition of the English country house. And of course, in the meantime, it's gone through various phases of paragraph 55 and 79 and now 80 of the latest MPPF. And there's been various designs of houses, both contemporary and traditional built all over the country as a result of this particular policy. And that says where the design is of exceptional quality and that it is truly outstanding and reflecting the highest standards in architecture and would help raise the standards of design more generally in rural areas. And you'll see from the report that we consider that that is precisely what is happening in this instance. It's also sensitive to the defining characteristics of the local area. Now, in terms of isolated, some objectors have pointed to the fact that this site is not isolated. And as I said in the report, and as I've reiterated there, it would surely be irrational to think that a paragraph 80 house would be acceptable in the middle of nowhere, miles from anywhere, but not adjacent to a settlement. And in this case, where we've got paragraph 11D coming into play, whether it's adjacent to a settlement or more remote from it, it makes it more acceptable that it is closer to the settlement, would be my view. So the case law is the Braintree case where the judge said that to be isolated, it should be separate or remote. It doesn't have to be both, it can be one or the other. So how do you define separate from a settlement? Well, there's no definition of settlement in the MPPF. The PLD would be the obvious way to take a logical boundary. Therefore, this site is separate from the settlement because it's outside the PLD, although adjacent to it, as you've seen. And the judge in that case did make the point that this is a matter of fact and judgment for you, the decision maker. But as I've said at the bottom there, paragraph 134 also applies and paragraph 11D applies where the development plan is out of date. So paragraph 134, development that's not well designed should be refused, especially where it fails to reflect local design policies. Conversely, significant weight should be given to outstanding or innovative designs which promote high levels of sustainability or help raise the standards of design more generally in an area, so long as they fit in with the overall form and layout of the surroundings. So in terms of the development plan policies, well, we've established that CS4 is now out of date and SP6 is out of date in terms of the locational policies of the development plan for new housing. So they can't really be lent any weight in this case now. So a site adjacent to the planned limit to development is in theory acceptable for the provision of new housing. The design in terms of CS19 and SP15, the design is of high quality. It's a contemporary modern take on architecture, but it uses appropriate local vernacular materials. And it's designed so that it's not intrusive in the landscape or in the setting of the village. Conservation Officer's comments are contained in paragraphs 40 to 70 of the report. So they are his comments. They're not reproduced separately as a consultee. So in terms of the impact on heritage assets, you'll see the Conservation Officer considers that the scheme is acceptable. But because you can see it on the edge of the village and on the edge of the conservation area, because it is just within the conservation area, as you saw, the result is that a less than substantial harm, which is one of the tests in the MPPF, and where there is less than substantial harm, it has to be outweighed by the public benefits. There's no scale of less than substantial harm, but the Conservation Officer considers in this case that the harm is very much at the lower end of less than substantial. So it is only just into that sort of category of impact. There's no interaction between the main part of the conservation area and the site. You cannot see one from the other. The development wouldn't be seen from within the conservation area, apart from in that corner of the site where that CGI image was developed from. There's limited impact on the setting of the church. You saw that one view from that one point on the footpath where you can see the church tower, but the building sits very much down in the landscape at that point, and it's surrounded by trees as a backdrop. So, and with the appropriate local materials, it's not considered that it has such a harmful impact on the setting of the church as to be unacceptable. and the benefits that would outweigh the limited harm. You'll see there's an inspector's report in our report where he said that one dwelling, albeit limited, would add something to the local housing supply and be of benefit to the local economy. And in terms of this one as well, we've got the high standard of architecture, the particularly high biodiversity gain. The building would be built to passive house standards, which means that it's the best sort of airtight, sustainable house that you can get. I think, as far as I know, we've only got one other in the county at the moment, which was built in Whitwell a few years ago. The applicant has agreed that there can be access for architectural students to understand good high quality design in rural areas. And as I've said before, the lack of our 5-year housing land supply also carries some weight in this case. As I've just said, that's the impact on the wider village. It's very limited impact from one particular point, mainly from the footpaths and the road approaching from the north, from North Luffenham. You wouldn't actually see that building. So in terms of the construction access, this will be taken from Glebe Road, as we explained. There was some objection to the use of this access, but that was at the time when there was a one-way system in place to the North Luffenham amenity site. Of course, that is no longer there, with the new access having gone into that site. As members have heard many times before, the impact of the construction is such a short-term occurrence. It's never a reason for refusing planning permission. And I think the Highway Authority has agreed that to use Glebe Road rather than Church Lane for construction access in this instance is a much more sensible option. There's a construction management plan required by the conditions, and there's a revised condition along with some others in the addendum that you will have seen, hopefully. And there is a condition on the recommendation that requires that construction access to be removed and reinstated back to its original state, including the reinstatement of the gate at its original width upon completion of the dwelling. So the scheme sets out a gain of 58% habitat units and 45% for hedges with the landscaping proposals that have been proposed. As members might be aware, the Environment Act was recently given royal assent, and that requires new development in the future to have a 10% biodiversity gain. So you can see that this scheme way outperforms that new legislation. There's no ecology objection from our ecology advisors, and they just want a condition to make sure that the works are carried out to achieve those particular gains. And in terms of archaeology, some investigative work has been done, but further work needs to be done both on the application site and the construction access, because there is some ridge and furrow in that field where the compound would be. So that needs to be looked at to see what mitigation needs to be done before work can start. In terms of sustainability, I said it's intended to be a passive house. Heating would be from a ground source heat pump. It's got a green roof. Soak away, surface water all goes to soak away to that wetland area and ultimately into the watercourse. I understand somebody raised the issue of access for emergency vehicles, so I'll deal with that now. This is an issue that's dealt with by the building regulations. The minimum width for a fire tender is 3.7 metres normally, but this can be reduced by agreement with building control and the fire authority. The current gate width into the site is 3.5 metres, but the applicants accepted that you can't turn a fire appliance within the site. And there would normally be a 45-metre distance from the roadside to the furthest part of the dwelling for hoses where the fire appliance can't actually get on site. Now that 45 can't be achieved, but the building regs do allow for a dwelling to be built with a sprinkler system, which doubles that distance to 90 metres. So and the agent has confirmed that the property will have a sprinkler system to meet the building regs. And this plan shows you've got the fire tender down here by the gate, and then this blue arc is the 90-metre distance, which you'll see includes the annex at the furthest point away from that part of the roadside. So whilst that's not a planning issue, I understand it may be raised, but that covers it. It's dealt with by the building regs. It's not something that you need to concern yourselves with. So in conclusion, it's sustainable development. It's a very high quality design. It complies with paragraphs 80 and 134 of the MPPF. Paragraph 11D now weighs heavily on your decision as well. There are considerable biodiversity gains, public benefits. There are no sustainable reasons for refusal. So it's recommended for approval with the conditions in the report and those additional ones that are set out in the addendum. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hodgett. Mr. Joyce, if you would like to come forward, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like the opportunity to rebut most of what Mr. Hodgett said. There are a large number of factual inaccuracies in what he presented, but I'm not entitled to do that or to join the debate. Therefore, I'm going to speak as quickly and concisely as I can, and please indulge me, I have quite a bit to say. I'm a retired chartered surveyor. I've lived in Morcott for 60 years. I spent 35 years on the parish council. I own property that surrounds the site. In fact, I own or control property that surrounds 3 sides of the site. Albeit in good faith, your planning officer has made a mistake by recommending this application for approval, and in doing so is about to misdirect you in law. Section 80E cannot apply because the dwelling is not isolated. There's recent case law, as he alludes, on what constitutes isolated. Isolated means remote from a settlement, according to the Court of Appeal in Bramshill v. the Secretary of State. Remote, of course, means the state of being distant, in particular, distant from the centre of population. Claiming it is isolated because it is behind a high hedge on the edge of the settlement is not only extremely tenuous, it's untrue. There is no hedge between the application site and our property to the west. There is a hedge between the application site and only half my boundary to the south. The development proposal, therefore, is simply to build a house outside the planned limit of development on the edge of the settlement. You've debated that in the previous application. Now, when Burley tried to put forward a scheme to build houses on the paddock adjacent to White Horse Pub, your planning department categorically stated you would not permit building outside the PLD. Your planning department is now trying to change its tune. Likewise, paragraph 134 does not apply because this is not a well-designed building. 76 of us villagers say that. Only one of you says it is. The application also goes against the Morcott Conservation Area Character Appraisal and Management Proposals, paragraph 15.8. That document is supplementary planning guidance. In Appendix 3, the Rutland County Council, as local planning authority, gave us, the villagers, an undertaking to apply it. MPPF 134, as we've just heard, says that development that is not well designed should be refused, especially where it fails, amongst other things, to take into account supplementary planning documents. A hint to the planning department the application was not well designed might have been those 76 letters of objection, a huge number for such a small village. Now, as the application fails these 2 tests, everything else is irrelevant. Letters of support or objection, the views of the East Midland Design Review Panel, the fact that the proposal will cut the village main sewer in 2, the fact that the access falls short of BS 5906, and we talked about the fire tender, it can't get to the edge of the site, it can't get into Pingle Lane. The fire hoses would have to be 150 metres long. The boundaries, the applicant also says he is going to widen the gate. He cannot do so. The boundaries, to my knowledge, have been in the same position since at least 1963. Neither the applicant, who didn't buy the land until 1986, nor the previous owner has ever questioned them. The gate to which Mr. Hodgett refers was put there by Frank Gilman in 1968. He put it in because it was a standard 12-foot gate, even though the access was less than 9 feet. There was never a problem. Now, until this application went in, the access was never questioned. The proposed construction access is going to destroy over an acre of traditional permanent pasture, in part showing remains of rig and furrow topography. There is incidentally no glebe road in Morcott. But furthermore, I was very dismayed to learn yesterday that there is in fact no agreement in place with the landowner to the north for the proposed construction access or compound. You've been misled. If you grant this application, you will risk the access for construction by default becoming via Church Lane, School Lane and Pingle Lane, which your Highways Authority has already advised is unsuitable. For the people of Morcott, most of whom want to live in a traditional, attractive, predominantly stone-built village and who spend much time and money repairing collie western slate roofs, building extensions of stone, raising the standard design, would simply mean using more attractive stonework, different pitches to a roof, ground source heat pumps, air source heat pumps, not a so-called eco house which stands out like a carbuncle, which bears no resemblance to anything in the vicinity, and which, unlike stone houses where materials are available from quarries within 10 miles and can last for centuries, the durability of this hydroform block in a site with a high water table is as yet untested. It may well be questionable. It may require large amounts of concrete to effect long-term stability. Finally, can I leave you with the following thought? The NPPF paragraph 126 says the creation of high quality, beautiful and sustainable buildings and places is fundamental to what the planning and development process should achieve. Ask yourself, if this met with any of those criteria, would you have had 76 letters of objection? Now, I know you have at the back of your mind that voting against an officer's recommendation can lead to failure and costs on appeal. But voting with the recommendation that misdirects you in law can result in higher costs on a judicial review. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Members, any questions for Mr. Joyce? Councillor Oxley.
Yes, thank you. Just clarification. You say there's no agreement at present on what the officer has said in the report about using the field on the other side of the stream to bring materials into the site. You say there's no agreement at present. What grounds have you got to say that?
That is my understanding, and my understanding is that the applicant has not spoken to the landowner in over a year on this subject.
Thank you. Okay.
Any other? Councillor Gordon Brown.
Chairman, in relation to the hedges around the site,
yes.
You own land around the site.
Yes.
Do those hedges belong to you or to the applicant?
The land to the bungalow, which is the land immediately to the west, has no hedge. There is a ditch and a series of mature willow trees, 8 or 10. The land to the west has a lot of trees on it. My dad planted them. The land to the south, the boundary, with the land to the south, this is slightly interesting because you were shown a picture of a complete field. Could we put the slide back up again?
Would that be possible? So we can see which bits we're talking about. That one, I think.
Right. If we go into the site along the sort of blue rectangle in the bottom left-hand corner, as you actually get into the site, there is an area of land on the right-hand side measuring approximately 13 feet by the width of number 2 Pingle Lane, which is ground not owned by the applicant, or ground which was certainly not owned by the applicant until before this application went in. I don't know if it's been bought now or what have you. It belongs to number 3 Pingle Lane and is supposed to be car parking. Therefore, if you were to drive down the access, you would not be able to get into the site without going across third-party land. Now, the boundary to the south has number 2 Pingle Lane does not have a hedge. The orchard to number 8 School Lane has a tall hedge which has been in there since the 30s. To the right hand, their hedges, their boundaries we own. The hedge to the right hand side, the field hedge, is irrelevant in terms of isolation because that's open countryside. And what we're talking about in terms of isolation is it isolated to the settlement? And by isolated, is it remote from, physically remote, distantly remote? And it's not, it's on the edge of the settlement. And if you pass this, as you were concerned with your previous application, you're opening yourself up to a whole load of applications for houses stuck on the edge of villages. The test of remoteness, as I understand it, is that it is several fields away, like the Cotswold application that Mr. Hodgett showed you. Sorry, I've gone.
Thank you. I'm happy with that.
Any other members? Sorry, Councillor Gordon Brown, Andrew Brown, sorry.
To get your Brown sorted out, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Joyce, I visited the site last week, and on the left-hand side, there's a lot of willow trees which are very mature, and a lot of them have fallen onto the site.
Yeah.
Are they your trees?
There are trees, yeah.
So you've got to clear them up, have you?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Any other members? In that case, Mr. Joyce, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Thompson from Morcott Parish Council, if you would come forward, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Am I on? Yes, I am. Good. I'm Andrew Johnson. I'm chairman of Morcott Parish Council and have been so since December 2015. I'd like to make it clear from the outset, Morcott Parish Council is utterly opposed to this application. This application has attracted some 76 adverse comments and objections from residents of the village who are concerned about protecting our heritage. Is Rutland County Council going to take any notice of them? The question is about representation. Does the council actually wish to listen and take notice of its residents who care deeply about the character and heritage of this unique county, or does it not? This application is for a building, or more correctly, a series of buildings, which do nothing to enhance the landscape or the village of Morcott, and we believe will significantly detract from the beauty of the village and its surroundings. We really worry about the credibility of Rutland County Council as custodians of the heritage of Rutland should this application be approved in this location. This emotional response is only part of the arguments I wish to put forward this evening. The other points I wish to make centre on the inaccurate and potentially misleading statements contained in the documentation supporting the application. The conservation appraisal is fatally flawed. Firstly, it is both undated and unsigned. And actually, we believe the document was prepared by a Mr. Ross Thane, who has subsequently, we believe, been discredited as a conservation officer. This is sloppy. It is also inaccurate and based on a false assumption. It states that it is written on the basis that the proposed dwelling is both within the conservation area and within the planned limits of development. This is incorrect. The location is in fact outside the PLD, a fact later relied upon in the officer's evaluation. These mistakes alone render it unsound, but there are other issues. The document contains numerous elaborately constructed mitigations of the situation, making it clear that the appraisal was written to fulfill a brief for approval. The way it is written indicates that it is probably a desk-based report rather than originating from visits to the proposed location. Several of its assertions are incorrect. It states that the views of and from the surrounding countryside are important to the setting and character of a conservation area, and then goes on to say that the proposed scheme will not adversely affect these views. We disagree. This is patently untrue. The views of Morcott from Glebe Road and many footpaths which cross the area are the best views of the village and the church. The author's assessment of minor harm is entirely inaccurate, as a visit to the site will demonstrate. The appraisal also inaccurately asserts that the external walls of the buildings will be entirely constructed of local stone. This is untrue. The buildings are to be constructed largely of a concrete type carcass faced with stone. The window surrounds of the annex will be metal framed. there are metal railings throughout the property. The angular shape of the buildings and the protrusion of the annex into the valley show no empathy with the surroundings. The officer's evaluation is also flawed. It is written in a manner that promotes approval, ignores some salient issues and facts to make its argument. In paragraph 10, the officer repeats the assertion of the applicant that the scheme responds to the place, protects the rural character of the area, and uses vernacular materials to reinforce the landscape. Nothing could be further from the truth, as the photograph below paragraph 12 demonstrates. This is a proposal to cite a modernist, some would say brutalist, overtly modern, angular and unnatural series of buildings within a well-established and supported conservation area in a beautiful village. It is not a beautiful country house. It would impose itself on the village and overpower its surroundings. This is where the credibility of the council is at stake. Paragraphs 13 to 23 are based on unsafe and unsound assumptions relating to the applicable local plan, sometimes quoting from it, but at other times where it suits the argument, refuting its veracity. The situation is clear. The current local plan is applicable until 2026. The assertion that the council cannot demonstrate a 5-year housing supply is incorrect, as the council has consistently met its 5-year housing supply targets over the last 15 years, a fact demonstrated in the debate on the local plan review that was rejected by the council in September. The issue of the gift of Quarry Farm allocation to South Kesteven is also relevant here. Nonetheless, this one dwelling will not make any difference to the 5-year housing supply, and it's worth noting that Morcott has just had permission for 6 dwellings on Vine Farm. David has already dealt with the issues with paragraphs 80 and 134 of the NPPF, so I won't repeat that.
Sorry, Mr. Thompson, are you about to come to your conclusion?
Yeah, I'm trying to.
Thank you.
I'm trying to, Mr. Chairman. In any case, should access be, paragraphs 70 to 71 to 74 are concerned with highways issues and access. It is untrue, as stated in paragraph 72, that agreement has been reached with the local landowner for access onto the site via Glebe Road. This comes first hand. Agreement has not been granted. However this assertion arose, it should have been checked before being included. As it is not viable for construction traffic to access the site from Churchill School Lane, this puts the whole development in doubt. In any case, should access be granted from Glebe Road to the site, there are numerous issues of which the council should be aware. It is estimated to complete the development, between 400 and 500 vehicle movements would be required for the construction stage to extract the volume of soil required to mount the building into the valley side and to import all of the building materials. On top of this would be vehicle movements by earth moving and construction equipment, and to fit out the interiors and ancillaries. This is a massive undertaking and should not be taken lightly, as it has many implications.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I think we'd better move to questions, otherwise I can feel members looking for, yes. Can we take questions now from members, or at this rate, you may well continue, but Councillor Cross.
It may be a bit naughty, Mr. but do you have any other comments for us?
Yes, I do, actually. Sorry, I was counting on the fact that the chairman would allow me to carry on. Yes, drainage is a vast issue. I said before, when 13 Church Lane was approved, further up in the village, that there would be issues with the water courses, and this was correct. There are. Neighbours have been suffering ever since with changes to the water flows subsurface. This building being sited in the hillside, in the valley side, will change the water courses. There are also issues with the floodplain. That floodplain is very active. It does flood in winter, and the amount of soil movement and extraction, the amount of vehicle movement over a stream, of which there is no real plan for a bridge, as far as I can see in detail, will also affect the drainage of the stream, both up and downstream. I think that should be taken into account. And much is made of the biodiversity and ecology impacts. The biodiversity report is quite vainglorious, really, in that this is already a field. It is an uncultivated field. surely that represents the maximum biodiversity that is available. The grass roof is merely replicating the field. And the fact that there might be some algae between the stones really should not be counted. So overall, we disagree with the officer's assertions that paragraph 80E of the MPPF applies, and we disagree with the fact that this building will not affect its surroundings. It will adversely.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Thompson. And if I could ask Mr. Hartley, the agent, to come forward, please.
Just to clarify, will the agent get the same amount of time?
He
as
will
the
indeed,
objector?
yes.
How long did it last, the objector?
That particular, the questions and the presentation, I think, came to about 8 minutes overall.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
On time, I mean, obviously, as you know, in the Constitution, we have time for people. And although it seems that obviously you can allow people to wrap up, if we don't keep to that, we have unfairness and unbalance, and that can cause complaints. And so I just really want to make people aware.
I can assist on that. I've timed my presentation at 2 minutes, 15 seconds.
If you would like to start off, Mr. Hartley, please do.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for this opportunity to speak on behalf of the applicant, my client, Richard Drunicki. Your planning officers already provided a very detailed and considered committee report and presentation. There's a clear officer recommendation of conditional approval for the planning application now presented, and a report from officers that there are no sustainable reasons for refusing planning permission. The application scheme now presented is a combination of 2 years of hard work by all involved from the applicant's side, but not just the applicant's side. The final design scheme was greatly influenced by detailed input from the council's heritage, landscape and planning officers. And in addition, the applicant sought independent advice on the qualities of the scheme from the Regional Design Review Panel, where those review meetings were also attended by your officers, and those views given at those meetings were taken on board, and again sought to evidence change in the scheme that is now presented to members today. So the support from all your technical advisors in the highways, ecology, heritage, and most importantly from your senior planner, who has the role of balancing all the relevant planning policy and other material considerations in arriving at a recommendation before you today. So it's clear technical support and professional support, and it's noted in the committee report, you're also required to consider the current matter of the status of the local plan and how that may influence decision making. So I don't pretend to tell you what you've already heard, I'd imagine countless times. So my client has set out to provide a vision of achieving exceptional quality, whilst being innovative in design and respectful of the defining character of Morcott in the local area. We hope that you're able to support officers' recommendation, and we reviewed the further conditions, and my client has agreed to those further conditions as well. And just as a final point in the context of a remaining question, which you may ask me, I've finished my presentation, is that there was an issue raised of, does my client have agreement for access for the construction access routing? And he does. I'm reliably informed by my client of that fact. Thank you.
Thank you. If I may just pick up on that last point, because it's very clear here in paragraph 72, you have a formal legal agreement in place.
There is an agreement. I have not seen the legal agreement, but there is agreement between the two parties.
Of course. Yes, indeed. So if members of the public, it is a meeting open to the public, not a public meeting. Sorry, Mr. Hartley, if you could continue with that.
So there is a verbal agreement between the two parties.
It is in place.
Yes.
Can I just also make a point that it's actually not that wouldn't be a legal reason to obviously refuse anyway. That's not even a planning. It's not, you know, it's not one of the planning judgment that you should be taking into account anyway. It's a private matter, not a public matter.
I'm being advised it is a civil matter. Yeah. Any other questions from Mr. Hartley? Councillor Cross.
To be fair, Mr. Chairman, would you like to add anything else?
No, thank you, Councillor Cross.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members? Yeah.
A point of order, Mr. Chairman. A legal representative says that it's a civil matter. I would have thought that an access way such as this was crucial to this application, and as such would come within our auspices. I don't think it's a civil matter as such. And I would be very concerned that we would pass a planning application not having some form of ensurety that there was a legal right in situ, because I think that is a very considerable planning aspect.
Obviously, take what you say.
I'll bring the legal officer.
Yeah, I mean, it is a civil matter. So it's, you know, when you're looking at material planning considerations, you can't look at private rights and who owns land, because I could even go and get planning permission, say, on your property, and obviously, and just notify you of it. So that's why that's not. So there's things like conditions where if you do think there is going to be a real issue in terms of them not being able to get access and not being able to commence, that you put things like pre-commencement conditions on so that they can't start development, so you get those things sorted out. But having said that, now pre-implement conditions have to be discussed with the applicant before we can put them on anyway. But what I'm saying is it's not a point of order. It isn't a material planning consideration. It's a private matter.
So I was just going to confirm that there are conditions that require construction management plans and things like that that deal with the requirement. In the addendum, there's one that says the development hereby permitted shall only be carried out using the construction access from Glebe Road as indicated on the approved plans. And there's also further conditions about construction management plan that also require details about that route being used as well. So I think we're suitably covered by condition.
Thanks, Chairman. I was just going to say that it is covered by a condition. So it's, yeah.
Any more questions from Mr. Hartley? Don't think so. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. So we now move on to the debate. It is the ward that Councillor Cross and I represent. I will reserve my comments to the end, but Councillor Cross, would you like to start?
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much indeed. Having visited the site, I was most intrigued with the plan and the operation. However, the impact on that pasture land, the impact on that stream at the bottom there, the comments that we have heard tonight, the fact that this kind of development is more suited to be well out into the countryside and to be a building of some note and architectural value leads me to conclude that it is not suitable for this particular site. I think that's all I need to say, Mr. Chairman.
Other members? Councillor Paul Brown was slightly ahead of Councillor Andrew Brown. So.
I too visited the site, and I too was very intrigued at the way this had been designed and had been set into the hillside. The
the land itself, I don't think can be described as anything other than scrub at the moment. It is not being used for agricultural purposes for many years. And it has no, if it had been, then I think we would have all considered that taking land out of agricultural use was not something we wanted to do in this day and age. It can't be seen very easily, as the photographs have shown us. I'm impressed that it is zero carbon. I think the biodiversity gain is quite considerable, and I find it disappointing that this cannot be appreciated by some of the objectors. And lastly, whether it is a design of exceptional quality under paragraph 18 is a subjective thing. And whilst I accept that it is not entirely in keeping at all with the existing architecture within the area, I still think it is of exceptional quality, and I would agree with the planners on this. And I think we can't always fossilize villages in a particular style, and I think it would be quite exceptional in its own right and show a form of architecture that is of this era. So I'm in favour of the application.
Councillor Andrew Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, I'm not any great student of architecture, but there is obviously some architectural interest and sort of exceptional interest, I think, in this building. But the fact is, it can't be seen from anywhere. And if you can't see it, well, it may have no architectural interest at all, because no one will be able to look at it. I mean, they say they're going to have to see it, but I mean, there's no idea how many, or what, or, you know, 5 every 100 years, I don't know. So, I mean, it is of architectural interest, but I'm not convinced this is the right location for it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Watsley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes. I have concerns about archaeology, I must confess. I believe that it is because it's ground which hasn't been disturbed for quite a long time. And given its proximity to the edge of the village, on a raised elevation, there's every chance that it may actually have some important architectural, archaeological evidence. So whilst I've looked through the report, and it does touch on a condition with regards to archaeology, but I think it would be good to have some clarification of exactly what is envisaged in order to be able to protect anything which may be uncovered in the event of importance. That's my first question. The second is, I do have, again, I have concerns about using the road which goes up to the dump, the North Nuffield Recycling Centre, for heavy vehicles. And I know that road very well, having used it on many occasions to go there from Uppingham. And there are a couple of quite blind corners, and it gets quite narrow as well further down the hill. So, but I can see the merits of using it rather than going down Church Lane and into the site that way. But as I say, and I was pleased to see in the addendum more detail on that matter. It did worry me that we had objectors talking or not actually putting any credence on the heritage element of the report. And as I say, it goes into a lot of detail, so I think it would help if we had Mr. Hodgett clarify some of the points which have been made on that, because as I say, that is at the heart of the reasons why it's going for approval. We have been asked to give approval to this application based on its architectural merits. And as I say, there are, I think, it goes into about 20 or 30 reasons why, from 40 through to, where is it, 60? Yeah, reasons why 70. They can't see that much of a problem with it. As I say, I visited the site. The fact that the building is going to be sunken into the site, so all people will see really is the chimney and the roof. There's one view from across the field that we've seen the photograph of, Mr. Hodgett took for us. I can see the merits of the building. I also remember when we had an application 5-6 years ago further down Pingle Lane on Church Lane for a similar building, which was quite groundbreaking architecturally, and there was a huge amount of concern in the village about it. But we gave our approval to it, and it actually hasn't, as far as I'm aware, made a huge impact. In fact, I think it has enhanced that part of the village. So what as I say, I'll wait and hear what everybody else has to say. When I walked back and I particularly had a look at it, it's finished now, that building. And it's, as I say, groundbreaking piece of work, and we gave our approval for it. I think that this building could have the same effect, but as I say, we have to make sure that the construction does not in any way detract from people's access to and from their properties. So I'm concerned about the archaeology. I'm concerned about the access from Glebe Road, but say I'll wait and hear what everybody else has to say. I'm still in two minds about it, but I'm verging on approval.
Very much, Councillor Oxley. Sorry, Councillor Bailey.
Thank you. Mark, I think you raised a good point about archaeology. I'd be interested to see from Nick how that will be dealt with. Just a couple of points. I think it does embrace exceptional design. It is designs like this, I think we as a community, a county, as a country need to look to embrace as we face the climate challenges that we do going forward. I've done a lot of research into what counts as isolation, and I've got a report in front of me, and a lot of it is, there is no definition in law, but a quote here is whether or not it is located within the settlement boundary. The settlement boundary is in many ways defined by the PLD, and in fact one of the objectors say that one of the objections is that it's outside the plan limits of development. So by definition it does tick the box for isolated as far as the case study I've got in front of me here. There was a quote about 5-year land supply. The latest figure on the RCC website as of the end of September is 3.95 years of land supply. So unfortunately it doesn't tick that box either. So we do have to take that as a material consideration. And I really see the issues with construction management. But again, I take the point that that's not a material consideration. So I think we have to park that to one side. It's difficult. I can see both sides of the argument, and I'm still debating my mind which way to go. But as with Mark, I think I'm falling down on the side of approval for the reasons I've just stated.
Councillor Gordon, sorry.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes, certainly. I'll take Councillor Gordon Brown and then adjourn for a moment. Yes.
Hope you're not rushing me, Chair, or Councillor Carney. As the officers will know, I challenge the question of sustainability, both with planning policy and with the officers on a number of occasions. And particularly now with the pressures that we've seen from the most recent COP situation. I question sustainability of Morcott. It's 20th out of 42 villages on our own 2019 list. So it's well down the list. It's got no post office, no school, no pub, no real employment, no doctor's surgery, no recreation ground, no area for play for kids. It's described as not suitable for access to Uppingham or Oakham by foot or bike, and does not have an hourly bus service. These are all things that one would expect in a sustainable location. So I question that. And paragraph 18 goes on to suggest that it would not be acceptable if material considerations indicate otherwise. And I'm going to go on to explain why I think there may be reasons why that's the case. And the suggestion in the paper that MPPF paragraph 11D can be outweighed by paragraph 80 and paragraph 134. Paragraph 80 asks the development to be truly outstanding and to raise the standards of design generally in rural areas. And is very important here in my view. It may be truly outstanding in the eyes of one or two people. I think I looked at it, and I've certainly looked at other photographs on the county's website, and it looks to me like a square box. I'm an engineer, I'm not an architect, I appreciate that, but it just looks like a square box to me. It doesn't look outstanding in any form. How does it raise standards of giant design generally in rural areas? I just can't see that. I don't see any evidence in the documentation on that point. It should enhance, as it says in paragraph 24, the immediate setting. And I think Councillor Andrew Brown made that point. It can't be seen. So how can it enhance in that situation? It's hidden away behind hedges, and the question mark of whether those hedges in fact are owned by the landowner. It should be sensitive to the character of the local area. I think it was a very good point made. It has no empathy with the local area. Its construction is of stone, not in the same style or even a similar style to the local area. So it's questionable and even 50-50 at best on that front. Paragraph 25 of the MPPF says, so long as they fit in with the overall form and layout of its surroundings. Now, if it's going to be adjacent to the site, sorry, to the existing plan limits development, one would say, therefore, it must fit with the overall form and layout of surroundings. Clearly, this does not, because it cannot be innovative and fit in with the 30 listed buildings around it. And I just wonder how many innovative buildings Morcott should have. Paragraph 29, it's for the decision maker to consider whether the site's isolated, and clearly this is not. On balance, it's neither separated, isolated, or remote. It's just an extension to the built form. Now, if we look at the Cotswold appeal that Mr. Hodgett put up on the map of that, it was quite clearly separated. There was a clear field of separation between the existing development and the new development. And I think that's therefore the Cotswold appeal has very tenuous links with this particular one. Paragraph 33, looking at similar development for a dwelling in the countryside, the committee were advised not that very long ago in paragraph 104 of the officer's report, and I'm quite happy to give the reference number, that the site is in close proximity to other buildings and cannot be considered isolated in terms of MPPF paragraph 80E, as determined by the Braintree judgment as the degree as to which it is away from places, buildings and people is limited. So officers have already stated on one application just a few months ago that such a paragraph 134 application did not meet the requirement, but this one does. I'm confused. So I question that. The paragraph 58 states a minor impact is less than substantial, but there is harm. And paragraph 59, interestingly, from the Conservation Office says it will preserve the compact nucleated pattern of the settlement. In other words, it will be compressing into the settlement, and therefore, again, I question the remote or the isolated element of it. Paragraph 62, I think, is purely superfluous. While there will be council tax addition to the county, there will be costs. not least of all our refuse collection because of the narrow lane here. And I presume it's on farms and lodges pick up down that part of the county. Yeah, I thought it would be. And therefore it's an additional cost to the county from that point of view. And the government is stopping new homes bonus. At least they've given that indication. We'll find out in probably 2 weeks' time whether that's the case or not. So that there was no benefit from that. Also, I note that on the construction access, it is a ridge and furrow, which is liable to be flattened. And again, there's no comment about that really. It just says, well, it's there and let's just ignore it. And also, really worryingly, there's no comments about potential contamination of the watercourse during construction. We have a major construction site on one side of the river, and on the other side of the river, we've got the actual construction site itself. So we've got a storage area on the construction site, and the river links the two or creates a barrier between the two, but we've not commented on the potential contamination of that watercourse. And I think that's, if this is approved, I would certainly wish the officers to put something in there to protect that watercourse during construction phase. I think is this an on balance decision? I think it's more on balance than, with all due respect, Mr. Hodgett has given us. I think it's an unbalanced one. I have misgivings about the development and the impact it might have on the other 22 villages around this county. I think it doesn't meet the test of NPPF 11D. It doesn't meet the test on 1180. It's not 80E. It's not separated or remote. And even the conservation officer agrees it preserves the compact settlement. It doesn't meet the test of 134. It doesn't fit the overall form or layout surroundings. And the potential impact will be greater than anticipated. I therefore have serious doubts about supporting this application.
Thank you. I will now allow a comfort break of that. I would be obliged if we could keep it within 5 minutes, please. Thank you. Thank you very much. We will reconvene. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to that? Councillor McCartney.
Thank you, Chairman. I think this is an unbalanced decision. I'm struggling to find a balance to this. I struggle to see the zero carbon element in this with that much concrete in it. I think possibly its maintenance and running carbon costs might well be negligible or close to zero, but the construction surely can't be anything like carbon neutral or even close or even trying. I think I worry about the reputation of us as a council not being seen to listen to 73 objectors. I've got 73 in the report. 76 has been mentioned, but I've got 73. I do worry about that. I worry about the result and what we will actually get if this is built. I think the design here, I think, looks lovely. I think I like it personally. I question whether that is what will actually be achieved after the amount of construction traffic that is required has crossed that land and compacted it to such a point that drainage will be an issue, and it may not look quite as drawn. The lovely pond at the bottom may look a little bit different, I think, given the amount of compaction on that ground that will have to happen to get that amount of soil and spoil away from that site. I think the design and mock-up drawings look wonderful, and they make much of the annex itself and not the house as a whole. I think we see, you know, when we look at the photos and the mock-ups in the report here, it is all viewed as if the annex is the main feature of the development and not the house. We're effectively looking at the annex. But I think it is outstanding, but I don't think it stands out in its setting either. So architecturally outstanding. Does it raise standards? Yeah, I think it does. There's dry laid stone, there's green roofs, there's all sorts of good things in there. I think it is exceptional quality and design. It's well hidden. It's, as we've heard before, not easily seen from anywhere but the footpath. I think it's quite sympathetic to its setting. If we don't approve some of these things, then there is never anything outstanding built. I just have concerns about whether what we actually get will be what is proposed. But I think on balance, I will vote in favour of this.
Thank you very much. Councillor Ball.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I must say at the outset, I have grave concerns about this application, and I share many of the points made just before we had a break with Councillor Brown. I mentioned before, when I spoke last time, that we should be consistent in our thoughts, in our decisions. And I'll take you back to things that we have said, not only in this council, but in many planning meetings since I first started nearly 20 years ago. We say that Rutland is a very, very, very special county. It's made up of 51 villages, which have evolved over many, many centuries. And this particular village is absolutely typical of what we treasure in this county. We come with many planning applications in this chamber and officers, and we will say the materials are typical of the county. We have thatch, we have roofs and all the rest of it. We have the local stone. It is typical. It is going to fit in with the village. And we've heard about a planning application of 6 houses in the village. I have no doubt that 6 houses are going to fit in with the village. When I look at this design, I say, do you know, it's very clever. Someone has really thought about it, but it needs to be outside, as we've already heard from a previous speaker, it needs to be outside the village. If I had that house, I would be very proud about it, but I would want it to be seen. I wouldn't want it to be covered up with grass and all the other, my personal view, admittedly, but this is what we have done. So whilst on the one hand, we're saying it's a benefit, it's a wonderful, a benefit to what if it can't be seen? And that is my great concern here, that we are taking a special, typical village and we are putting something which is not in keeping. And again, we also have a duty to listen to the people who put us into office. So yes, it's a special design. Yes, we can say it's hidden, but for me, it is in the wrong place within fairly center of the village, notwithstanding all the other issues about transport, loads, excavation, papers, lorries, which are going to, what do we know that's going to do? So I'm sorry, members, I cannot vote for this application this evening. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ball. If anyone else has anything else to say, otherwise I haven't yet spoken on it. I'm not going to spend a lot of time reiterating what members have already said on both sides of the argument to that extent. What I would say is Morcott has got a village design statement. It didn't actually progress as far as a neighbourhood plan, but it is there and it is very clear, as other members have said, that Morcott values its heritage, it values what is there at the moment. I would also say that a year or two ago, the then conservation officer took the trouble to come to Morcott, and some Morcott residents will remember this, and he was extremely helpful. He sat and listened to what Morcott and Morcott meeting had to say, and he came back, I think it was 6 months later, largely taking on board what Morcott had asked for. That protected the planned limits of development to the east on the old, now obsolete pub site. He also included various areas at the edge of the village, which he considered, after listening to that meeting, were integral to the setting of the village. Now, if I were a resident of Morcott, I would feel I was very well served by that planning procedure. I now look at this report and I find that on the archaeology, as Councillor Oxley's already pointed out in its paragraph 94, that Ridge and Furrow would be involved in the loss of Ridge and Furrow. You can't restore it once it's gone on that construction site. I look at the ecology on paragraph 85, and I'm quoting directly, we would usually expect to see calculations submitted in support of any net gain. There are no calculations that I can see anyway. And when you come to the design, it is entirely subjective, as members have said. I might think it's marvellous, I might think it's dreadful, but I come back to reiterating what other members have said. It is the wrong design for that location. And that is where I stand, members. And I think we now can move to take the vote. So I'm looking for a proposal on that, please. At the moment, it is recommended for approval. Councillor Paul Brown. Move the recommendation for approval. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Beggy. We'll move to the vote on that then, please. Those in favour of approval in line with the officer's report? That is 4.
5.
5.
Chair.
And those against?
5, Chair.
It really is my evening, isn't it? I'm sorry, officers, for the second time this evening. I'm going to be consistent to myself, if not always consistent to policy, and I'm going to vote against, and I'm now going to ask for a further proposal that we refuse the, that we, yes, we refuse the application. I've got Councillor Ball proposing, a seconder.
Just, can I just ask?
Yes.
Before you take the vote, can we just agree that what the reasons for the refusal will be?
Certainly, members.
I think Councillor Brown is.
Yeah.
And indeed your own words also with the village design plan.
Yeah.
Sorry, Councillor Brown, your microphone.
Hedges. Not used to that. Meeting the test of MPPF 80E, not being separated, remote or isolated, and the conservation officer agrees because he says it compacts the settlement. The MPPF 134, it does not fit the overall form or layout of surroundings. So that's second point. Potential impact will be greater than anticipated than the harm as suggested. The loss of ridge and furrow in the construction on a temporary basis. This is not a building for housing which has got benefit. This is purely temporary basis. And there's a question over that whole ridge and furrow. It's that whole area, in fact, is very significant ridge and furrow. So those are the key points. And I think the village design statement has not been addressed at all. Now, I recognise it is not a significant material planning consideration, but it should be addressed in the documentation and brought to members' attention in the normal circumstances. That was my understanding, it always was done. It appears now not to happen. It'd be better if they had a neighbourhood plan, but that's another story. So those are the key points, Chair. I don't think I'll put in the sustainability argument.
Yeah, I've got those down, and what I'd suggest we'll do.
So, Chairman, yes, I've got those down. What I'd suggest that we do is, if members are do decide to refuse the application on those grounds, that I'll agree the final wording with Councillor Brown, so that I've got exactly what was envisaged.
If I may, I would also add your, as board member, your summing up as well, Chairman.
Yeah. Well,
I'm
sure we can arrange that. Yes. So if I may now formally go to the recommendation to refuse. I think Councillor Bull, you had proposed that, and Councillor Cross is seconding it. Those in favour of refusal?
5, Chair.
Thank you. And those against?
4. 5. Sorry, could I ask members just to raise their hands?
Yes, just raise a hand again.
5,
Thank
Chair.
you. And my casting vote is as before. So that is refused. And thank you very much for the debate, members. And so again, if anyone who came to the Morcott wishes to leave now, please do. And we'll move on to the next item. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Let's crack on. It's the Oakham one, not the school one. Mr. Burberry, if you'd like to lead us off, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is an application for a coffee shop. Thank you, Chair. This is an application for coffee shop with drive-through facility and ancillary development and associated works off land at Land's End Way, Oakham. Many of you know the site. It's the side of McDonald's drive-through restaurant. An overhead photograph shows the location of the site, context of the surrounding area. Closer view, which from Google Earth Maps, which shows the existing McDonald's drive-through facility in place. This is looking across into the site of the coffee shop and drive-through from the access road leading into McDonald's. This is another photograph from the corner, and you see to the back is the new Ben Burgess building going up. This is the front of the site with this gap roughly marking where the new entrance would be. This is again looking across the site to the rear. The steel containers there are on the site where Ben Burgess development is currently taking place. That's looking back across the site from the access towards the McDonald's restaurant. This is the application site area. This is the site layout plan, which you'll see the relation, well, the scale of the development in relation to the parking and the proposed landscaping around the perimeter of the site, which is quite significantly more than that was at McDonald's. These are the elevations and roof plans of the development, which are using some similar materials that McDonald's used with regards to the Bradstone cladding and also Ben Burgess in their design of building. This is a generic photograph, certainly the one at the bottom with the Costa sign on top, showing the outdoor layout and the style of railings that would be on the outside, protecting the entrance from the outdoor seating area. Main issues are policy, and those are set out in the report and in the addendum. Some of the SP policies didn't all print out for one reason or another. The principle of development is that proposed coffee shop and drive-through use being allocated on land allocated as employment land. Design and materials, internal and external alterations are considered acceptable, would be sympathetic with the character of buildings in the surrounding area. Travel plans being produced and acceptable. Lighting being designed to comply with relevant standards and best practice. Noise and acoustic barrier has been designed as part of the rear boundary only. And the equipment that Costa would use would not operate above the levels agreed with the environmental protection team. No impact assessment is required due to the floor area being under the 500 meters squared. Alternative sites were investigated in compliance with MPPF, but were found to be not suitable by Costa. Landscaping has been submitted, but the applicants agreeable to a condition to finalise the detail of the scheme. As you'll see in the addendum, the senior planning ecologist is not in agreement with some of the species used for the hedgerow. You'd like to see biodiversity gain and see a native mixed species hedgerow rather than a single species. The development is sufficiently far away from nearby homes and would not have an adverse impacts. Car parking complied with parking standards and recommendations with regards to ecology identified in their ecology report would be adopted and included as a condition. Conclusion. There's some conflict with policy CS13 of the adopted local plan. However, the development would comply with chapter 7 of the MPPF, ensuring vitality of town centres, and section 11, making effective use of land. The site represents an appropriate location for a drive-through coffee shop. The design and layout of the buildings is appropriate. The buildings will not have an adverse impact on the surrounding area or amenities of nearby residential properties. The proposed development would create the equivalent of 15 jobs. The proposed on-site parking complies with the adopted parking standards. The applicant is prepared to enter into a unilateral undertaking to provide 2 waste bins in the surrounding area and to empty them over a 20-year period. Subject to completion of a legal agreement for the provision of 2 waste bins, it's recommended that planning permission is granted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Barham. I don't think, I can say Councillor Bailey, I think you're probably the nearest member and residence, if not in anything else.
Well, 3 points to raise. I think it's relatively straightforward. Just for clarity, I didn't say anything about like the McDonald's type of advertising. Would that come forward as a separate application?
There is an application already in, but they've entered into negotiations.
Fine. So that will be covered by a separate application. That's great. We mentioned rubbish bins. I think McDonald's had a condition where they had to do some localized litter picking as well.
Yes, a litter condition or litter condition is proposed in that huge list.
Okay,
So
I saw the rubbish
litter.
bins. I must admit about the pickup of litter. And the third one is about parking and whether or not there would be any charging points.
Yes, there would be 3 charging points.
Thank you.
Questions. The plans were amended very late on to increase the electric parking charges by 1.
Thank you, Darren. I rest my case.
Other members, Councillor Oxley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, in fact, I was going to ask the question about the rubbish because I'm sure there will be concerns locally with regards to another fast food outlet which will be allowing people to take food off-site, coffee off-site. Now, I note in the addendum report, there's quite a detailed crime officer and architectural liaison officer report from Leicestershire Police. It goes into a lot of detail. Will that actually be a condition of if we decide to go for approval? I mean, they're talking about CCTV to cover the entry point by vehicle with the capability to capture images of vehicle number plates. Key areas including key entry points to the coffee shop and service area for the drive-through. There's a lot of detail there, and I think it would be helpful if perhaps the officer could comment on that report and what is actually achievable from a planning conditions viewpoint.
Thank you, Chair. A copy of the letter that was received today from the police has been sent to the agent. We had a discussion this lunchtime. As you see from the addendum, I'm proposing that 2 informatives are added with regards to, just remind myself of the the 2 informatives are added with regards to the CCTV and also the storage of the commercial wheelie bin. But as you'll see from some of the contents of the police letter, some of it relates to residential dwellings as well. I don't think there's too much in there that we can actually tie up with a specific condition.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to get that on record. So that it is CCTV is recommended to cover the entry point by vehicle with the capability to capture images of vehicle number plates, also other key areas. and commercial wheelie bin storage is recommended to be away from public areas to avoid the risk of arson. And I'm sure someone else was probably going to ask the question, but would it be possible for them to actually do something with the packaging to put the number plates of the vehicle that's actually buying the the waste so that it can be traced? Because we did ask this question at McDonald's I can't remember exactly what was said, but it might be helpful if we had asked the same question this evening.
I think this was asked at the McDonald's application, and I don't think it was something that we could enforce or rely on. I mean, we can ask the applicants and put an informative on and ask them about it, but it's not something that we can condition. I don't know.
To do with personal identification.
Yeah, I think there was an issue about, as Darren tells me, personal identification with doing that. But as far as I'm concerned, we can add an informative that members would ask that they consider it, but it's not something that we can insist on.
Just add to that, I think there was a trial done by McDonald's where they rejected it because it was open to abuse, where there was youths, for example, emptying bins and littering, and people were getting wrongly accused.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Well, I'm not in any way can we, I think, turn this one down. But what I would, I think, be asking of officers, and I'm looking more to our Rutland image, our Rutland long-term policy, is to how, and we had this not in a similar way at all, really, but we had the problems in Uppingham with the bright red of a certain premise. Can we, and you probably say no, but or can we develop a policy for the future where we are having companies coming in with their corporate images, which some of them, in my language, is quite brash, quite sharp. It's the modern way of marketing, perhaps. But what I am concerned about is where we have another development and we've got a bright pink logo followed by a really garish yellow, followed by something. And suddenly Rutland becomes, so I have a place, we have a place in Westminster. We have a Waitrose, we have a Tesco, we have a Sainsbury's. You would not know they were there until you go through the door, because they have had a policy in place to actually protect the area. Now, okay, this is it's adjacent almost to a trading estate, it's building its road, and I know what you're going to say, and I'm trying to, the horse may have bolted, but is there something that you can start to consider to bring some conditions in? And I'll give you, I'll use the, if I may, Mr. Chairman, I'll use it. The Rutland Hall Hotel, which has been renamed, you know, when you go up on that top road, that new sign of theirs, I think, is almost dangerous to driving. Now, so I don't know if we have a policy on the lumen ratings of various things, but it's that sort of thing I'm trying to sort of sell or introduce or put your mindset into as to sort of the policy. But as an aside, if anyone is driving up the hill, they may disagree with me, but go up there and see how bright that light is.
So can I ask which hotel that was? So
sorry, it's been renamed. It's the Rutland Hall Hotel. It was Barnsdale Hall. So it's the one on sitting on the North Shore with all the
yeah, we can have
it's come right on the road, and it really is bright.
We can have a look at that, because highway safety is one of the things that we can consider.
I'm not an expert, but I think it is distraction. I digress. Apologies, Mr.
I think you have a very valid point. It's possibly going slightly out the remit of what we're looking at just at the moment, but I'm sure Mr. Johnson will take it on board, and it's a perfectly valid point.
I think it would be something that we'd have to look at through the new local plan is the main point to bring it up, but I'll mention it to the policy team.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gordon Brown.
Yes, Chairman, it'd be nice if we had a local plan. 4 years from now, sadly. Paragraph 11.
Meeting, please, gentlemen.
Paragraph 11. I note that we're accepting 44 dB between 7 and 11 o'clock and 37 between 5 and 7. Now, interestingly, McDonald's was 44 and 30. And I'm struggling to see why, in this case, McDonald's, with all their equipment, we accept a lower level, and Costa, with almost nothing, we accept a higher level, and closer to residential development as well. So I'm just wondering why we're accepting 37 dB against 30 on this occasion.
From speaking with the environmental protection team, they went with a different standard for McDonald's because of the applications that were around at the time for residential development around both sides of the McDonald's site.
All right. On the employment land?
Yes.
Okay, right. I shall
With
leave that
regards
then.
to where we are now, Craig's been out to site. There's been plenty of discussions between him and the applicant's sound acoustic engineer.
Okay.
And that's why in this instance, we've got just one acoustic timber fence along the rear boundary. And also there's acoustic measures now also on the Ben Burgess site.
Yep.
Which weren't, again, taken into account when the McDonald's application was being considered.
Thank you. That explains that. The other point I've got on the sound levels is that it's determined by measurement or calculation near residential premises. I always get very unhappy about that, particularly my recent experiences with quarries. I know Nick and I are in the same boat in this one. I'd much prefer to see an absolute distance on that, saying that at a distance of 30 meters in any direction, they will not exceed these numbers. And that way we know for residential developments anywhere beyond that, we're going to be well within those numbers. So I don't know if we can maybe ask our environmental protection officers to consider those points.
I think we can go back and ask them to consider it. I think the issue is that if there's no property there, there's arguably no harm if you've got a physical boundary that's drawn at 30 meters. And if you understand what I'm saying, if there's nothing there, and I think that's where we've possibly come unstuck in terms of whether it's reasonable to have that if there's nothing to protect.
Let's ask them. Okay, thank you. And then one other point was in relation to the travel plan, which you indicated was agreed because I hadn't picked that up. But on the McDonald's travel plan, there's a requirement for that to be reviewed after opening. I presume that's still the case with this travel plan as well. Good, that's very good. That's fine, thank you.
I think possibly, unless there's anybody else, we can move. Sorry, Councillor McCartney.
Sorry, everyone. I think we ought to condition the mixed species hedge rather than a single species hedge on the side of the site. I don't think that's an onerous thing to do. I think that's quite simple. It's certainly not where I would choose to sit out for a cup of coffee. I've just got back from a week in Cumbria and I had plenty of drive-through coffees on motorway service stations and on the sides of main roads. And the principle of a drive-through coffee shop I'm comfortable with, but there seem to be an awful lot of parking spaces here and quite a bit of provision for seating. And I'm just wondering who's going to actually sit on those seats or use those parking spaces. And the site itself seems quite large for a coffee shop, but that's changed hands already, I think. Has it the site's been bought by the applicant? Yeah, so yeah.
That's my understanding, yes.
So I think we're limited there. I think if I'd had my opportunity to design this, I'd have probably put something half the size in there with very few parking spaces and just kept it as a drive-through. But that's just my opinion. That's all.
Thank you very much. Are we ready to
just one picking up, if I may,
yeah,
on one very small point, go back to Caroline Cartwright. There was a standard Rutland hedge, blackthorn, holly, beech, everything. And I agree with you that I think is may not be appropriate in this one, but I think it's well worth considering to have a standard in future developments. That's what we used to have.
Can I take
just following on from what Councillor Bulls just said, Natural England does have one that I have to use when I'm gapping up and such like, so you could adopt that. Yeah.
Fine. Somebody make a proposal, please. Councillor Beggy. As per recommendation. Thank you. And second, sorry, was.
Say, subject to all the conditions which have been set.
And they are, as
Subject
you will
to all
see,
the
members,
conditions. Yeah.
considerable and detailed. Yes.
And the ones we've mentioned about CCTV and the hedge.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Yep.
Are you ready for the vote to be timed?
We are indeed. And
for the record, unanimous.
very much. I'll now hand over to Councillor Begg.
Can I just seek legal advice? Do I actually have to physically move, or can I just stay here? Thank you. It may increase the brevity. I'll wait for Edward to shuffle off this mortal coil.
Mr. Chairman, do we want to extend the meeting? It's to 9:15. Do we anticipate it's going to go further? I think it would be useful to.
I think that's a good idea, Mark. Let's vote to extend it by hopefully just 15 minutes to 9:45.
Yeah. Okay. All those in favour? Yeah.
Any further, you have to come through me. Thank you. We will now consider application 2021-0698 full Brook Priory School Station Approach Oakham Rutland LE156QW, construction of a new artificial multi-use games area with associated sports lighting, fencing and ancillary features for pupils of Brook Priory School. Darren, your presentation, please.
The red oblong oval is the location of the site in context of the surrounding school area, both Brook Primary and Oakham School, and obviously the employment uses along Station Approach and residential properties which are quite faint from this distance and in this slide along Station Road. This is a closer view. And an even closer one, which shows the area with the green area, which was originally the residential garden areas of the properties on Station Road, and the parking and turning area within the school grounds, and obviously the play area to your right as well before you get onto the grass pitches that belong to Oakham School. This is a photograph from within the site looking back towards the school car park. In the far distance to your left, you can see the builders merchants. This is a photograph looking from a similar position where I was standing before, looking back towards the residential properties which have had a timber fence erected, shortening their gardens. This shows the neighbouring properties to the, I think that's to the west, isn't it? Not to the east. To the east. This is one that's taken earlier in the summer that was taken from the garden area of number 87. This is the photograph from within the site, looking at the garden, looking at the properties number 87 and 85, which are the semi-detached properties down from the neighbouring terrace, well, from the terrace properties that have had their gardens reduced in length. This is another photograph across the site internally. This is another photograph which shows the bottom of the garden or looking at the bottom of the gardens of 85 and 87 with the high mesh school boundary fence on your left hand side. This is the play area that's at the bottom of the gardens of 85 and 87, which also backs on to the car park, which members may remember seeing when we visited last week. This is the part of the entrance or the access to the site, which would be used during construction and maintenance. And this is the entrance from Station Road. The red line is the application site area, the blue line is the land, the remainder of the primary school. This is a plan which shows the layout of the multi-surface pitch with access gates to the school and also access gates for the maintenance for pedestrians or vehicles from Station Road. This is the layout of the football pitches and the other structures that would be ancillary to the development, the steel container, the benches with storage containers below, and a couple of shelters surrounded by some steel fencing to safeguard those structures from the vehicles circulating in the car park. This plan, which certainly from here looks quite faint, but the blue lines show the light spillage from the 4 floodlights, and it also shows the 4 floodlights, even though I must confess I'm struggling to see them on that from this distance. That should be sharpened up.
If we turn off the lights, that might help.
Those green circles are the position of the floodlights, which would be on 8-meter high columns.
So there's one there. There and there, roughly.
Can I just ask that we see that the bottom half of that plan in more detail where the rate is shown? So the bit we showed at the top, can we see the bottom doing the same thing? So just expand down at the bottom. Sorry, Chair. Did you say 8 meters?
The lighting poles are 8 meters high.
Thank you.
There's the other, that's where the other pole is there.
So the green arrows, are the direction of the lighting units would be pointing across the pictures. That's an elevation view of the lighting column. That's the type of floodlight that would be used. That's a drainage plan, which, along with other additional information, which you'll have seen in the addendum item, has addressed the second reason for refusal that is in the committee report. The main issues are policy, which are all listed in the report. Oakham Conservation Area. Conservation officers confirmed that the development would not cause harm to the character and appearance of the conservation area. Lighting, environmental protection, no objection, subject to a condition that lighting is switched off at 9 p.m. The LFA following receipt of amended plans, as I've already mentioned, have removed their objection. Highways have got no objection to the use of the existing access from Station Road for construction and maintenance only. The multi-use games area is enclosed by a 3-metre high green coloured rigid panel fence with access gates. Car parking, the proposed development doesn't have any impact on the existing parking or turning area. Residential amenity. As you'll have seen in the report, it's considered that the proposed siting of the multi-use games area and its associated infrastructure would have an adverse impact on the residential amenities of not only the 4 houses that had their garden areas reduced in length, but also 2 dwellings to the east. These next couple of slides just reiterate, the issues that are covered in the committee report. Notwithstanding the change from the previous refusal, which obviously has seen an extension of the garden areas for the 4 residential properties that form the terrace building, it's still considered that there's been no compensation for the other neighbouring properties to the east in the revised scheme. So in conclusion, the amended drawings and information submitted addressed concerns of the LLFA in relation to drainage. The changes made to the original scheme, mainly the increase in the length of the rear gardens of number 95 to 89 from 6.5 metres to 12 metres, is considered to be insufficient to address the original reason for refusal of application 2021-0122. No mitigation has been proposed to address the impact on the properties known as 87 and 85 Station Road. And it's recommended that planning permission is refused as a result of the development proposed having a detrimental impact on the residential amenities of the properties listed there.
Thank you, Darren. Could I ask David Norrell if he would like to come and speak? Just to remind you, you have 3 minutes. I'll have a tiny bit of leeway, but we've got a maximum of half an hour left, so not very much.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, councillors, ladies and gentlemen here. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in favour of the council. I hope I'm pushing on an open door. There are 1 or 2 points I wish to make. I am but one neighbour living in 81, but I speak, I think, for my other neighbours who have made objections in writing, like scholarly, ecological. They know all about the bats and the foraging areas, but thinking about how I should emphasise what I'm going to say, I want to speak for the people who haven't spoken, who haven't even objected, who haven't made a comment, and that's the residents who had their gardens truncated by 80%, and indeed the resident of number 87, who also hasn't made any comment. I think these people need a voice. I will, yes. Forgive me. The history is fairly, it may be known to you, it may not. I looked out of my bathroom window and discovered that these gardens had been truncated. I next noticed that trees were being uprooted and felled, and that measurements would be being taken to assess the whether the ground could sustain a weight. This was, I believe, because this was a COVID time. I believe this was before there was any suggestion of a particular structure going to be built. This eventually, this was refused on lots of grounds. It wasn't clear exactly why it was refused, but it was one of the things that was mentioned that I pointed out was that I assumed that permission had been given to change the usership from domestic to school or commercial. This was pointed out in the refusal that actually no such request had been made. I'm very glad to see that mention has been made in the second refusal. And indeed, I congratulate the council in sort of taking not just the moral high ground, but I think it does set a precedent. I know there are occasions with force majeure that, you know, compulsory purchase and things like that. But here's a situation where tenants were deprived of their amenity.
We're at 3 minutes. Can you just start wrapping up and summarising any final
So
points?
to complete, what the pictures you saw were of a wasteland. It was not a wasteland. It was half a dozen, four or five nicely tended gardens where youngsters could have played. With COVID. It would been exactly what they would like to have done, but it wasn't there. And I think that seems a shame, especially because to a certain extent, what's suggested in terms of the Muga is nowadays not really what I think the world, the country, Rutland need. More plastic.
Can we just sum up, please? We're at 4 minutes.
It needs to. I support the refusal on the basis that it sends out the right message from Rutland, that we don't pave paradise, put up a parking lot, and we respect the rights, if whatever they may be, of tenants who would expect it to have a garden and then find they haven't got one.
Thank you. Members, any questions for Mr. Morrell? Councillor McCartney, then Councillor A. Brown.
Thank you. Mr. Norrell, is your garden one of the ones that's been truncated?
No, it's not. That's what I'm here to speak for the people who have had their garden truncated.
Where do you live?
I live at 81. So there's 81. There is no 83. Don't ask me why there's no 83. Then 85 and 87. And
Which one, where are you?
So I'm sort of
there. Okay. Thank you. And he's here.
So I'm just 3 doors down.
How did it come about that these gardens were truncated? And did you?
And I saw them. One day there were gardens, nicely worked gardens, and the next there was a fence.
I think the details are a question for officers when we get to debate.
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
But I do understand that clearly there had been an assumption that the land could be used for the school, but no permission had been requested.
I think we'll cross-examine officers when we come to debate. Councillor Andrew Brown.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Norrell, just for a point of clarity, the gardens that were truncated, those houses that had those gardens, they, I think, are already in the ownership of the school.
I understand.
Is that? I mean, maybe that's not a question for you, but
I think that's a question for officers, but I believe that is what it says in the report.
Okay. Yeah.
Any more questions, members? Thank you, Mr. Norrell. Can I ask Karen Brightman, the agent, would like to come and speak? Thank you. The same rules apply, 3 minutes. I did give Mr. Norrell up to 4 minutes, but I think members would be happy if you try and keep it to 3.
That shouldn't be a problem. I've timed this and it comes in at just under 3 minutes. So I'll talk very quickly.
I'll reset your time.
Good evening, councillors. I'd firstly like to clarify 4 important site-based facts for the benefits of any councillor who has visited the site independently. Point 1, the garden fence on site that we've seen on the slides is not in its final position. Should this planning application be approved, it will be moved 6 metres closer to the school, doubling the current garden length for the Station Road properties. Point 2, that the playing fields to the east, that again you can see on the slides, do not fall under control of the school. Brook Priory School actually has no playing field space to call its own, although the owner of these fields, Oakham School, does allow some of these facilities to be used. It retains priority, making advanced planning difficult for the primary school. Point 3, that the school itself owns and leases the residential properties that we've just been talking about. And then the 4th point, the existing access to Station Road will be used purely for construction and maintenance. I think the officer has already pointed that out to you, with the games area reached via the school premises only. Planning decisions are rarely black and white. They inevitably involve a balance. Your officer has quite correctly identified a balance based around the development plan, and there is no doubt that the proposal complies with the policies of this plan when they are taken as a whole. In simple terms, the balance struck by the officer weighs the value the proposal will bring to the school against amenity concerns and finds the amenity concerns to be greater. I would urge you please to look carefully at this balance and to use your own planning judgment to consider it. The MPPF could not be clearer on the weight to give to promoting healthy communities via school provision. It says in paragraph 95 that great weight should be given to, I quote, the need to create, expand and alter schools. You simply must attach this great weight to a proposal which does exactly that, one which provides the children at Brook Priory School with their own recreational space in order to embed the principles of a healthy, active life at an early age. The support offered by Sport England to the application reinforces this positive benefit. Turning to the counterbalance, it's not clear from the report where the harm to amenity actually lies. Your own technical experts raise no issues in relation to noise, visual appearance in the conservation area, or the lighting. There is no defined minimum garden size for Rutland, and many recently approved schemes have rear garden depths of 12 metres or less. Caution should be exercised around relying on an assertion of harm to amenity without any evidence to back that up. It should be noted that any changes in amenity for adjacent properties are small scale and limited by the timing and nature of the use. These are primary age children who would only play there between the hours of 8 and 6 on weekdays. There are absolutely no plans at all for external use. The proposed lighting would be on only for a handful of occasions in the winter. And
We're 3.5 minutes. Can you just wrap up, please?
I'm very quick now,
Thank
sorry.
you.
All these things can be secured and carefully controlled by planning conditions. I would urge you to review the planning balance and the weighting to be given to its elements very carefully. There are strong benefits to the scheme that are simply not outweighed by anything of substance. And I politely suggest that a conditional approval is the only sensible decision to make here. Thank you. Sorry for the speed talk.
That's very good. You had exactly the same time as the other speaker. Thank you. Members, any questions, please? Councillor Andrew Brown.
Just a couple of points. The school coped okay for years without its own pitches. Has the school expanded, or has Oakham School changed its policy? And the second point is, why do you need the floodlights if they're only going to be used during the school day? Because it's a primary school that doesn't sit very late, essentially. And again, you've coped quite well without floodlights for a long period. So why do you need them now?
It's my understanding that obviously schools do expand and evolve, and there are some issues at times with being able to use Oakham School's facilities. There's no guarantee that the school can rely upon those. So it makes things like organising a tournament or whatever in the school day difficult. And the school as an educational institution is obviously trying constantly to improve its physical education offer. With regard to the lighting, there will be some very limited occasions. There might be some after-school clubs, for example, at this time of year that might require some lighting for health and safety reasons. So it's quite possible that there might be lights on up until 5 o'clock at night, something like that. But they are very, very few and far between, because, as I say, the school won't be, the area won't be used at the weekend, and it won't be used in the school holidays, bank holidays. So there are a small proportion of time really that the school would use the lighting.
Thank you. Before I go to Councillor Gordon Brown, I think we just need to have another vote, another 15 minutes. All in favour? This is our final 15 minutes, so we have 20 minutes. Councillor Gordon Brown.
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned that the gardens wouldn't be as short as they are, but your plan submitted with the application, which is ends 005, shows them in exactly the same place, that the fence in exactly the same place as that red line, as far as I can see. So I don't see how your assertion that the gardens are eventually going to be longer when you're going to put a steel palisade fence up there.
If I may, the point I was making there is the fence as it is on site at the moment is only 6 metres from the back of the properties, which matches with the previous application that I believe you refused. If this application were to be granted planning permission, those garden lengths would be extended to 12 metres. So the fence that you actually see on site at the moment isn't in its final position.
Yeah, and the fence will be an open fence, not a solid fence as it is currently.
No, it's a green mesh.
Green mesh, there'll be no privacy to those gardens.
Well, there'll be garden fencing, I'm presuming, behind that, but
that's not what's in here.
Oh, right. The fence that would surround the courts would be green mesh.
I shall challenge the officer on that point. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Oxley.
Very quickly. So the fences which are there at the moment are part of the previous application, which was refused.
The position of the fences is where they were previously when the application was refused. Those fences would obviously remain at the bottom of the gardens, but then the mesh fence of the school would sit behind those, because the mesh fence is obviously there for another
No, that's not my question. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
My question is, why was all the gardens removed and cleared before you had permission to do it?
The school owns the property, so the school obviously has permission to do what it wants with its own land. But that is nothing to do with applying for the planning.
Well, it's a change of use. That would be a change of use. If you're intending to level 5 gardens and then put in a playing area, then that's a change of use, isn't it?
Well, the play area hasn't gone in. The gardens
Councillor
have
Oxley,
been
I've just
cleared.
taken legal advice says they do not need permission and they've not changed the use. Thank you. Any final questions? Sorry, thank you very much. Now open up to debate, minded that we are 15 minutes from the end. Obviously, we're getting into deep debate. We would have to consider deferral. Councillor Oxley.
Very, very quickly, Chairman. Yes, I have got very real concerns about this. When we visited the site, I was struck by the acres of green fields, albeit owned by Oakham School, that the school does actually have access to. They have to negotiate presumably with Oakham School in order to use it. I'm also concerned about the fact that this is pretty much retrospective in that the application which was refused, the only difference that I can see is that the fences are going to be a little bit closer to the school from the properties whose gardens have been removed. So that's as I see it. I have problems with the lighting. Where I live in Uppingham, I can see the lights from the UCC school very clearly, and that's probably 3/4 of a mile away from me, at the same level as me on the hill. And this is a very densely populated part of Oakham. I really feel for the neighbours, the people who live adjacent to the school, to this site. It really will impact on their neighbouring amenity, in my opinion. So I'll hear what everybody else has to say, but I can't see any reason to accept the application.
Thank you. Councillor McCartney.
Thank you. Just a question that the change of use isn't required, because surely the garden is a residential use and the school use as a games area is a commercial use. That they intend to.
To apologise, it's late at night, but they've not used they're not using the land, are they? They're not using it at the moment, so they're just clearing it and they put it.
And secondly, I agree with Councillor Oxley. Cottesmore has a football pitch which is floodlit. There are more floodlights in this, but I can see them very, very clearly, and they are borderline intrusive. And I live in Barrow, which is about 1.5 miles from Cottesmore.
Thank you. Councillor Payne.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just clarify something? The document I've got states the hours will be 8 till 6, but I think, Darren, you said 9 p.m.
Yes. That was the feedback from environmental health with regards to when they would consider a statutory nuisance would
Okay.
start from 9 p.m.
So the school
But the school have proposed different hours.
Okay, so the hours of darkness that they'd need these lights for would be very limited.
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Bull.
Just to clarify though, unless we are extremely tight with our conditions, at some time in the future, presumably that could be altered.
I believe if you read your
later.
papers, it's got it is conditioned 6 till 8.
As
8 till 6.
as is the use as the school were perhaps to expand, etc. Just to sum up my views, I find this. I can't support this proposal. I think the officers have summed everything up very clearly in their recommendation, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any further questions? Councillor Brown.
Just a very brief one. I think the point that I picked up on paragraph 37 is about the quality and relationship of Rutland's housing stock should be protected regardless of ownership. And I think this particular application is not protecting that ownership either now or in the future. So I fully support the officers on this particular case. Thank you.
Thank you. If there's no further questions, can I ask somebody to propose the motion? Gordon Brown to propose the acceptance of the officer's report to refuse. And second, Mark was the first one I saw because I was looking that direction. Sorry, Abigail. So those in favour of the proposal to refuse the application?
6, Chair.
For approval? And abstentions? Try to make sure no one was slow, Gordon.
Sorry, Chair, I missed your vote.
I've abstained. Thank you.
Yeah.
I apologise. I forgot. Paul had said he wasn't. So I was looking at you waiting for you to do something. Thank you. So the motion, I believe, is carried, Tom.
Yes. Sorry.
Do you want to retrieve the chairman? But if you want it done quickly, you could leave him there.
Yeah.
Yes, no, appeals are noted while I'm still in the chair.
Oh, wait, the Jim's all right. Have any appeals been lodged other than these recently? I think
Not seen those as yet. As soon as they are, they'll appear on the list for members.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Vice Chairman. Over to the appeals report.
Thank you, Chairman. We'd received two well, 3 appeal decisions, but one relates to a planning and listed building case at the Horse and Panniers, 12A Church Street, North Luffenham. This was one where we had a previous appeal that we had won, so it had been dismissed, and that was to convert the property into 2 dwellings. The appeal now is a split decision, which in effect allows the change of use, but the inspector dismissed it in terms of the fixed louvers that and the internal courtyard wall that were proposed. So in theory, he came to a different conclusion to the original inspector and has allowed the conversion of the property to 2 dwellings. The other one that we have received was the outline planning application for the erection 4 light industrial units, and that was off the A47 at Glaston Road in Morcott. Sorry, Glaston Road. There, the inspector agreed with officers that it was an inappropriate location for that form of development, so that was a good win.
Thank you very much indeed. Any questions from anybody? No, thank you. In that case, we move on to item 7. Any other urgent business? I've been notified of none. The only thing I have to say is, as you will have noticed, we've got an additional meeting on the 21st of December. Again, we're catching up with the backlog, and I would actually just like to say publicly to the officers, they have been working under difficult conditions. It has been a backlog, and it is getting moved. And so thank you for your efforts, and thank you, members, again, for a long marathon session tonight, and thank you for the quality of the debate. So with that, I think it's 10 to 10, isn't it? I'll duly close the meeting. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.